I would imagine if I'm Tyrandor, I'm trying to keep that under wraps. I want as few people in general for a variety of reasons to know that information. So maybe Pancheck specifically goes to Tyrandor to get the intel on the wards, and then he's like, Theophanie, come on. Yes, absolutely. 100%. This is canon.
Girl.
Hey, girl.
Hey,
what
girl.
you doing?
Hey, girl. Get over here.
Party at Dune's Temple. Violet will be there with Tyrn. Yeah, absolutely. Canon. This is what happened.
Welcome back to the Booked on Fantasy podcast.
I'm Addison.
I'm Lorraine, and we are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through books, shows, and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. Today we are covering Onyx Storm chapters 50 through 55, and fair warning, this is going to be a long episode because we just had too much to yap about. Perhaps over-yapping, but we won't know until we finish the book, and we're getting very close now. As a quick reminder, we are a spoiler-free podcast. We have only read up to the chapters we are covering and no further, so we have no idea what's to come in the rest of the book. With that being said, we will be discussing chapters 50 through 55 specifically, but it is likely that references to the previous chapters as well as Fourth Wing and Iron Flame will come up as well. If you are not caught up, then definitely stop here. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have adult conversations. Explicit language or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. If you're reading along with us, then next week's episode will cover chapters 56 through 60, and then our final episode will cover chapters 61 through 66, and that will conclude Onyx Storm. We're gonna be done.
No.
I know. Next, if you are a fan of our Onyx Storm coverage, then the best way for you to support us is to leave us a review. If you are on Apple, then a quick star rating or a written review are both great options. And if you're on Spotify, then you have the option to do a quick and easy star rating as well. Last but not least, we do plan on doing a theories episode after we finish the book. So if there is anything in particular that you want us to discuss, or if you have a theory that you'd like to present, then please send us a DM or an email, or you can also send us a text message. There's a link in the episode description that's just says send us a text, and it's really easy. However, we cannot respond to you if you send us a text, so just keep that in mind. We are super excited to get into theories and also watch the Rebecca Yarros Onyx Storm specific tour interview, because we've been avoiding that as well. And I'm sure that will clear up and answer some questions that we've had.
Oh my gosh, you have no idea. Every time I get on Reddit and I scroll the Fourth Wing subreddit, I see spoilers like, stop if you have not finished Onyx Storm. And I'm like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And man, as soon as I finish that book, I'm going to open my laptop and I'm going to read everything.
All right, that's all for housekeeping. And now let's get into the episode. We will start with the book report where Addison will summarize each chapter. And next we will convene a meeting of the assembly where we will deep dive, analyze, and theorize each chapter. And finally, to end the episode, we will share our favorite moments from the set of chapters discussed. With that being said, Addison, please give us the book report.
Happily, chapter 50. Another night, another nightmare. Except this time, Violet had a relic on her hand, and her hand looked like Xaden's? Weird, right? Violet wakes from her nightmare and sees Xaden, who also appears to be having his own nightmare. Must be from the storm, right? Wrong. Folks, the wait is over. Violet's second signet has been revealed. Turns out she's a dreamwalker. Violet and Xaden go through all of the nightmares with the sage that Violet can remember, and Xaden confirms those are all his nightmares. Violet then remembers the strange dream she had in Samara. She realizes the only way to confirm this theory is to talk to Marin. Xaden and Violet wake a sleeping Marin, and she shows Violet the picture of her family and tells her that losing that picture used to be her worst nightmare. But before Violet and Xaden could discuss it any further, Tyrn sounded the alarm. A horde of wyvern were approaching from the east. Chapter 51. News of the attack spreads and Ryerson House comes alive. It's all hands on deck because an unknown number of wyvern are converging on the city, and it seems like the wordstone really isn't holding up. Brennan, Xaden, and Violet quickly discuss what resources are available and the best way to utilize them to defend Erasia. As Violet prepares to head off with her squad, she is stopped by Aaric, who gives a cryptic warning to protect the Temple of Dunne. As Violet and Tyrn prepare for a battle, they quickly realize they need to break ranks and head off on their own, but not so fast. Rhiannon and Fierge follow Violet so they can work in pairs. After some truly gravity-defying maneuvers, it seems like Violet and Rhiannon are doing some pretty good work until Violet catches sight of a rider on the back of a wyvern, a rider with silver hair. Chapter 52. Taryn is wounded, but thankfully, 'tis but a scratch, sort of. In an impressive display, Rhiannon uses her signet to remove the wing spur from Taryn's leg. They prepare to launch, but they are too late. Theophanie has arrived, and this time she's not leaving without what she came for. Violet. Bad news for Theophanie, but good news for us. She, in fact, would not be getting what she came for. Violet feels a ripple of magic, and Theophanie flees, vanishing into thin air, Harry Potter style. But our beloved characters aren't out of the woods yet. Several wyvern come crashing down and head straight towards them. Fierge pushed Darna out of the way, saving her, but causing the wyvern to crash straight into the temple, which then caused deadly projectiles to explode in every direction. But Zaddy shows up in the nick of time, stopping the chunks of marble with his shadows. Suddenly, Violet hears the slide whistle sound and scales the color of night ripple before her, and Leothin appears. Chapter 53. Leothin fired the wardstone as the 7th breed, which meant Aaricia was safe. In fact, most of Tyrrendor was. It was too easy, or was it? Leothin tells the group that he had been watching them and he feels that Darna was judged unfairly by the other Irids. He tells everyone that he will speak only to Darna and Violet. Everyone departs, leaving Violet and Darna alone with Leothin, and he makes Darna an offer. He tells her that she can come home with him to learn their ways. Our sweet baby Darna, of course, says she cannot leave Violet because of their bond. And Leothin says the worst thing I have ever heard. And Darna can simply break the bond. A moment later, Violet reaches for the bond, only to find a wall, then nothing. Leothin and Darna disappear into the sky. Violet struggled to breathe, struggled to move. All she could think was, she left us, she left us, she left us. And Darna was gone. Chapter 54. And Darna is gone, and Violet is so emotionally devastated from the loss that she can barely get out of bed. The days pass in a blur while Xaden, Brennan, and the squad sit with Violet. It isn't until Mira shows up that Violet is shaken out of an almost catatonic state. Xaden and Brennan show up, and when Brennan and Mira start arguing, Violet will do just about anything to get away from their bickering, including getting up and taking a bath. In the most tender and loving moment, Xaden bathes Violet and tells her he will support her in whatever way she needs. Things get ugly when Violet overhears Mira and Brennan arguing about what Grandma Niara told Mira about Violet and their parents. Turns out, they, or Asher, Lorraine and I are divided on that, took Violet to Umbriel, where she was only partially dedicated because her path wasn't set. There's still a chance that she could turn venin. At least that's what Mira thought, until Xaden revealed to Mira that he was the one the priestess was talking about because he turned venin for Violet. Mira pulls out a dagger, but Brennan and Violet stop her. An angry Mira then storms out of the room. Chapter 55. Mira doesn't tell anyone and things seem to go back to normal, whatever normal means at this point. The squad is in rune class, and to no one's surprise, Violet is absolutely failing miserably despite her best efforts. It isn't until Quinn gives her some advice that she is actually able to make a rune good enough to work in a pinch. Felix then takes her to the mountains to practice wielding and lectures her about the dangers of not following orders. As Brennan mends her muscles for the 3rd day in a row, he lectures her about taking it easy. They then discuss the ongoing political situation with Nefar, but are interrupted by Xaden and Bodhi arguing. Bodhi is pissed that Xaden is basically keeping him under lock and key to protect him, so he can take over Tyrrendor when Xaden finally loses it. Violet realizes this is why Xaden has been so peaceful, because he's setting everything in place for his eventual demise. Violet confronts Xaden and he admits to it, but he isn't giving up. Violet asks if he wants to go sit on the roof, but Zaddy had other plans. He'd much rather have Violet sit on the throne. And that concludes the book report.
Thank you for those summaries. And without further ado, let's get straight into our assembly meeting. And of course, we have our overarching thoughts to start off with.
First, I want to start off with a quick correction to something we discussed in the last episode. I was basically complaining about the inconsistencies across the books about how long Taryn and Sigel can be away from each other as a mated pair, because it seems the actual amount of time continues to lengthen in each book, despite the first book setting us up to believe that they can be apart for like 3 days tops. One of our listeners, Abigail, DM'd us on Instagram and reminded us that in the bonus chapter from Fourth Wing, chapter 27, where we get Xaden's POV, Sigel mentioned something to the effect of, "You're using my bond with Taryn as an excuse to be here in Montserrat, but really it was you who could not be away from Violet. The implication being that they are more than capable of spending 3 days apart. They just don't like it. I guess essentially my takeaway from that is they can be apart as long as necessary. They just get grumpier and crankier about it. So that's fine. It still feels a little shaky to me because that logic was like so heavily used as justification for like a lot of events and things. But when I'm wrong, I will maybe admit to it. Okay, I'll maybe admit to it.
I think in general, it's not always discussed or like plainly explained, but I guess it seems like, yeah, the dragons can be apart. I would also like to add that they discussed this in chapter 9 when the squad is sent to Samara as punishment. I think we like kind of touched on this or alluded to this in the last episode, but in chapter 9, a major ranked rider states his mated dragon Maze informed them of the attack on Newhall thanks to her mated dragon Grime. And Violet thinks, right, they've been mated for decades and are able to communicate at a far longer range than Taryn and Sorrengail. So I guess that implies that as the mating bond grows stronger, the dragons can probably go longer periods of time without seeing each other because maybe the fact that they can still communicate as well just kind of helps them
bridge
not
the
feel
gap
the effects as much. Yeah, bridge the gap from not being around each other as much. So,
and that makes sense
anyways,
too. Yeah. So let me just say thank you so much to Abigail for messaging us. We truly love hearing from you guys, even if it's something we were wrong about, despite the fact that I hate being wrong, but it's okay. These books contain an insane amount of information, and we try our best to be as accurate as possible, but we're only humans. So if you guys ever notice anything we missed or were mistaken about, please, please, please DM us or email us. Also, if you have any theories or extra evidence to support what we discuss, send that to us too. And especially if you love the podcast, definitely let us know that. We definitely want to hear that part.
We thrive on affirmation.
Oh, I literally live on it. I live on it. Sweet treats and affirmation. That's all I need. But my overarching thought actually related to this set of chapters is we finally get Violet's second signet. That's it. I'm so excited to discuss it and its implications, and my head is just spinning.
And as far as my overarching thought goes, I was on God Watch and those signets. We actually have a few more details about implications for other people's signets as well to discuss. So there's a lot going on, and we tried to keep our overarching thoughts to a minimum because, as we said, quite literally, our document of notes for the set of chapters is like 67 pages.
Yeah. So when we say we do the work, guys, we mean it. I think if you put all of our notes together, it would be like the length of a dissertation.
Oh my gosh. PhD.
I'm fine.
Onyx Storm over here. Anyways, okay, so that wraps up our overarching thoughts, and now we can actually start our chapter analysis, starting with Chapter 50, the excerpt. This was correspondence from His Grace, Zaddy Ryerson, to King Tari. Xaden basically gives the King of Navarre a big FU when he states he is declining Tari's request for him to sign a new provincial commitment. We know from Chapter 44's excerpt that King Tari was looking for any law that supersedes the unification scrolls and would allow the Kingdom of Navarre to take temporary authority over all the provinces and their respective forces. But no law could be found. After the second Horatio Accord was signed, control of troops and forces were returned back to individual provinces. Keeping all that in mind, it's kind of funny because from Chapter 40's excerpt, we learn of our doubled conscription rates, and yet in a roundabout way, all King Tari really did was also double Tyrannor's forces by extension. I mean, it seems like King Tari doubled the conscription rate, basically banking on the fact that he'd be able to find a law or get the provinces to sign a new provincial commitment so that he could have control of the increased forces, but it kind of just backfired on him.
Dude, I did not even think about the fact that Tari inadvertently doubled Tyrannor's forces, which Xaden could hypothetically now use against the king if Halden decides he's going to roll in there. And that is the ultimate karma. That did not even calculate for me. And when I was reading your notes, I was like, oh, that's amazing. And I think in the chess game of politics, that's what we call a checkmate.
Ooh, yes.
We also discussed this in the last episode, but it does not surprise me in the slightest that Xaden refused to sign another provincial commitment. Why would he? As a matter of fact, why would any of the provinces sign a provincial commitment? Why would each province not want to command their own military force especially given the impending war with Venin. So now I'm going to answer my own question. I think the reason other provinces would be compelled to sign a renewed provincial agreement is probably because they need resources from other Navarian provinces, timber, livestock, crops, etc. To our knowledge, all of the provinces produce something, but really wouldn't be sustainable without trading with other provinces. So it benefits them all to be unified from an economic aspect. If they weren't unified, they would have to negotiate trade deals with every province individually, which they could do, but then you're just in this constant state of negotiation and you run the risk of supply chain issues and all that, and that's not good. However, as we also discussed in the last episode, Tyrrendor is unique because it basically has everything it needs to sustain itself without the help of other provinces. That's why Xaden feels so bolstered to basically tell Tari to fuck off, because Navarre needs Tyrrendor, but Tyrrendor doesn't need Navarre.
That's right.
That's right, baby. Tyrrendor. Tyrrendor.
All right, so we have a big reveal chapter. We get another nightmare where Violet has entered into Xaden's dreams, and the implications are pretty crazy when you think about it. Since we officially learned that it is Xaden in this dream, and Violet is seeing and experiencing the events through his eyes, we are going to refer to the person in the dream mostly as Xaden as we go over the details. In addition, the venin in the dream is referred to as the sage, quote unquote, so that's what I'm going to call him. But we'll talk more about who we think the sage is when we break down some of these details. So in this dream, Xaden is back in the same meadow where he is called to time and time again, quote unquote. And the sage venin appears and tells him, "I grow weary of waiting," and warns, "You are ours. You will bring what I want or she dies. I'm through waiting and I will not allow her to win such a prize." Xaden reiterates, "You do not have her." And then he's dropped to the ground where he slams his left hand to the ground to reach for power. But before he can, the conscience of Violet realizes that this is a dream, and Xaden wrenches his hand from the ground. Violet then screams, "Wake!" And just as the sword of Tyrrendor appears at Xaden's throat, Violet wakes up back in reality. So with the confirmation that this is actually Xaden's nightmare, woohoo, there are lots of things that parallel the nightmare in chapter 45, which we figured was Xaden's as well. We have the reappearance of the sage venin, who is calling for Xaden to come to him. There's the lightning strikes going on in the sky. We have the sword of Tyrrendor appear, and there's also a mentioning of Dreythus. Last episode, we discussed how there were elements of Chapter 45's dream that felt like there was some foretelling of events to come, intermingling with past details of Xaden's experience at the Battle of Biscaeth. I still stand by that, actually, because the sage says, "This city will fall. Yours will be next." And as we see, there is a venin attack in Erasia starting in the next chapter.
I agree that it does seem likely. I don't even know if you can call it foreshadowing because it's really not subtle at all. The sage is literally like, "Hey, this is what's going to happen." So I think it's pretty indicative of probably the next set of chapters.
True. I also think that the venin saying, "You are ours and you'll bring her to me," is a clear indication he's calling to him to bring Xaden under his command. But the sage also wants Xaden to bring her, quote unquote. And I believe that her is referring to Violet, but it's also possible it could be Sorrengail, but I'm leaning mostly towards Violet. These are facts we have in the current timeline, and therefore I do not feel that these dreams were really about the past necessarily. I can't say for certain if premonition type stuff happened in Marin's dream, but I do feel that in Xaden's dreams, the details are meant to influence or persuade things to happen in the future, if that makes sense.
My understanding was that Marin's dream was from the past and what she experienced during the fall of Cliffsbane, but I mean, we're literally talking about dreams here, right? Dreams are not memories, so it's totally possible there's elements of past, present, and future. It's your subconscious, your psyche. So there's probably a mesh of all of those things.
We also see that in the dream, Violet thinks they're in Dreythus because that is how she is interpreting the scene, since she hasn't realized that this is Xaden's dream yet. And we know Violet fears for Mira's safety, who is currently stationed in Dreythus. I do still think there's going to be some sort of battle taking place there, but I guess we'll see about that.
So are you saying you think the dream is not happening outside of Dreythus? Because you said Violet thinks that they are in Dreythus.
I think, yes. I think that by Violet still thinking that they are in Dreythus, that is a little bit of a premonition thing that indicates there's going to be something happening in Dreythus, even though the dream is Xaden's dream. And presumably he's reliving this nightmare of Bisgaiath.
Yeah, because
Like,
Xaden tells Violet that it is Strathus. Like, the city she sees that he sees is Strathus. Because he asked her to describe it, and he's like, oh, yeah, you know, the city walls and the tall tower, whatever, that's Strathus. That's why I was confused.
Oh, okay. So then, yeah, I definitely think some shit's going to be going out on Drathus then. Anyways, long story short, this dream does not feel like it's about the past. It definitely feels like it's about something to come, if that makes sense.
I agree. I think the only element of the dream that is reflective of the past is the same. He's in the field, the sage approaches, they do the whole you'll turn for love thing. And then I think it melds into what's the future. So that's the only part I think that is reminiscent of a past experience. But everything else is present.
Right.
Like the sage is actually talking to Xaden and or future. That's how I understood it.
Yeah. We're in agreement. I guess I just wasn't very clear about.
No, it's confusing. There's a lot going on, and yeah, it's a lot to unravel.
So outside of the foreshadowing detail, I did find it notable that the sage tells Xaden, I'm through waiting and I will not allow her to win such a prize. So I definitely think the sage is referring to Theophanie in this instance. We know that Theophanie is competing to get Violet as well, which is also why I still stand by my prediction from last episode that the sage in this dream is actually the venin named Berwin.
And this is where Addison wrote a novel, so buckle up, everybody. So I'm going to plant my flag firmly in your camp. Based on this detail, I'm going to agree that the quote-unquote sage in the dream is Berwin. And here's why. I wrote a lengthy expose on why. So last week, I said there were 4 potential options. Berwin, Theophanie, the head honcho big bad general venin that I speculate exists, or another notable unnamed venin we have yet to be introduced to, Nailin. It's just a possibility, obviously unconfirmed. Those are really our best options. Probably those 3 venin. But really the only 2 named ones that we know of are Theophanie and Berwin. In addition, those are the only notable ones that are sage rank or higher. There is some debate on whether the big bad general venin from the Battle of Bisgaiath is Berwin or not. Last episode, I did not think that Berwin and that venin were the same, but I have since changed my thoughts, and here's why. Lorraine and I are both solidly on the same page that the venin in this nightmare, aka the venin they keep referring to as quote-unquote the sage, is Berwin. When Xaden is talking to Violet and confirming this is in fact his nightmare, he says, but they're definitely my dreams. You've never been to Drathus, and that scenario, it's exactly what happened on the edge of the river when I fought him at Bisgaiath. Xaden himself is confirming that, quote-unquote, the sage in the nightmare is the same venin general he fought at the Battle of Bisgaiath. So, whoever this sage is in the dream is the same venin he fought at the end of Iron Flame. Xaden is confirming this in text. When I read that, I'm like, okay, so that eliminates some unknown Nailin or, someone else, right? It's also probably not Theophanie because he always refers to that sage as a him. I think he would probably be able to know if it was Theophanie based on Violet's description of her. Last week, I speculated it might be Theophanie because it was described that Violet could see wisps of silver hair in her peripheral vision. So I thought we were talking about Theophanie, but now I'm wondering if Berwin also has silver hair. In my opinion, the other
I think he does.
I think he does too. Okay, yeah, I think he does. In my opinion, the other very damning piece of evidence is the phrase that you read, I'm through waiting and I will not allow her to win such a prize. We know from chapter 11 when Violet first meets Theophanie, she says about Birkenstock Berwin, besides the fact that he's subpar and you'd be chained to him, powerless to resist his orders, she sneers in disgust. It seems pretty obvious that Theophanie and Berwin do not get along, and they have a rivalry, which makes it seem highly likely that, Lorraine, you are in fact correct. The her in I'm through waiting and I will not allow her to win such a prize is Theophanie. All of this leads me to believe the sage is Berwin. The sage and the general big bad venin that Xaden fought at the Battle of Bisgaiath are the same. Therefore, it's Berwin, baby. So the big bad venins are Berwin, Birkenstock Berwin, and beautiful, terrifying Theophanie.
As a follow-up question, I had one that I noted under your whole logical explanation there,
okay.
And then I had a second one that I already wrote. So first off, knowing that Theophanie is actually a maven and that Berwin is noted as a quote-unquote sage in these dreams, but do you actually think it's possible that Berwin is also a maven?
I think he's absolutely a maven.
Right.
I think so too.
Okay.
Because you wouldn't use language to describe like big bad general whatever like they do at the end of Iron Flame. Because remember there's that quote like a soldier dies the same as a general does or something. And he's like, do they?
Right.
So I really think that they're equal in rank. And just the context, the way they talk about each other really feels like they're peers, that they're equals. If Berwyn was under Theophanie, she'd be like, you ain't shit, I'm above you.
Okay, yes, I agree with that. And then second question. So you are thinking that the head honcho, big bad venin is Naolin.
I
Are
don't
you, like,
actually.
planting your flag on this front?
No, I don't.
Then why are you saying that?
Well, because, okay, in my heart, I think that would be so crazy. Like, that would be so awesome. What a twist and turn. But logically, that wouldn't make sense because the general consensus in the fandom is that Naolin turned venin to save Brennan. That was only like 6 or 7 years ago, which means Naolin would have only have been a venin for about 7 years, which I don't think is enough to rise to the ranks of in charge of all of the venin, because Theophanie admittedly says she's quote unquote immortal. She's probably hundreds of years old. So I don't think so.
Oh, yeah.
He may be like high ranking,
because
but not.
I've seen people be like, maybe Naolin is the big bad general, but I agree with the fact that he hasn't been venin long enough, I don't think. Now, maybe because he was a siphon, he like
extra superpower.
Yeah. And yes. Like a level.
He's like
he's
like a extreme venin. Like the Energizer Bunny.
But
supercharger.
Yeah, overall, I don't really strongly subscribe to the idea that Naolin is like the big bad honcho venin. Could he definitely be venin? Yes, absolutely. But I think I'm still leaning in the direction that General Daramore is probably the big bad head honcho venin.
I agree. And for this quick recap for you guys, General Daramore is the big bad guy from way back in the very first Great War. Unclear on whether he's actually dead. The venin disappeared for a long time, but then they resurfaced. So no one really knows what the heck happened until I see a body that ain't dead.
Yes.
Yeah,
that he was actually killed and that he actually died. So
General Daramore's name was not on the death roll, so he ain't dead to me. Okay.
So anyways, so in addition, to get back to the dream details, I found the description of how the sage pulls Xaden in the air really interesting. It says, icy fingers wrap around my neck, too vaporous to fight, yet substantial enough to nearly cut the flow of air. This kind of sounds familiar to the way that Xaden's shadows are described. Xaden's shadows can sort of, wrap and grab things in a rope-like manner. And I wonder if these icy vaporous fingers in the dream are actually just shadows that have been drained, because the sage is venin, and we know that when they drain something, the color fades as well. On the other hand, it could just be a generic power that higher up venin possess, because we do see that Theophanie can suspend people in the air as well, like she did that to Garrick in chapter 10. Plus, I am not sure how this sage would have both like a powerful shadow signet as well as being a dreamwalker, because I also think that he's a dreamwalker. Unless venin have multiple signets, I don't know.
I mean, that would stand to reason. We know Theophanie can wield lightning and or storms, unclear on that. And she can distance wield. That's 2 signets. So it's totally not out of the realm of possibilities that they do have multiple signets. So I think that's a great call out. And I wonder, since we're going down this route, what if Xaden was supposed to be the shadow wielding balance for Berwyn, or whoever the sage venin is, but probably Berwyn.
Ooh.
But then once he turned venin, it created a imbalance, and that's why Lynx now has shadows.
Yeah, I don't know. This is crazy, though. It's crazy. It's crazy to think about. I have to sit and absorb it.
Yes. I don't even know. I'm doing this back and forth with my hand because that's how it feels in my brain. I'm like, that's not indicative of anything, but my brain's trying so hard.
It's possible, though. It's totally possible. Next, we see in this dream that once Violet subconsciously realizes that this is in fact a dream, it's described that Xaden wrenches his hand from the ground. And this definitely plays into the fact that we learn Violet meddled in the dream. Last but not least, clearly we see that the sage venin is entering into Xaden's dream as well, and seems to be trying to influence Xaden to come to him and then also bring him Violet. So naturally, I have to ask, do you think what is happening in the dream is what has been described as, quote, the call of a sage or maven? And is it something all higher venin can do to recruit the initiates into their ranks? Or is this a specific signet power for this particular venin, meaning Berwyn, in this case, is a Dreamwalker as well? Which, if that's the case, then does that mean Violet is the balance for this venin too?
That is a fantastic question. And as we sort of just discussed, it's a little confusing. How does the balance system actually work? Is it a 1-to-1? There's a lot of unknown variables for that. I'm going to say that this is unique to Xaden's situation because most people that turn venin wanted to do it and or were okay with it. So they probably didn't fight the urge to go and seek a sage or other venin out. I think because Xaden is fighting it and they want Violet, that's why they're subjecting him to this special nightmare of dreamwalking. Because, I mean, Jack Barlow was delighted. He was like, yes, power me up, baby. So they didn't need to infiltrate his dreams and tell him to get over here. He was like, I'm already here, bro. I'm at the party. Where are you? But Xaden is probably the only venin in the world who didn't want to do it and did it for love and is fighting the urge to go.
True. Okay. That makes sense. I would think that entering into a dream seems fairly specific. And as we learned for Violet, doing that as a signet really puts her at risk because it's such a dangerous signet. So I would imagine that that's probably a specific thing that Berwyn in particular has. Anyways, to move on, Violet wakes up and then shouts at Xaden down the bond to wake him from the nightmare as well. Xaden begins to ask Violet about the nightmare she was having, and after a few questions about the details, they realize that Violet was in Xaden's dream. I do want to note that Violet tells Xaden, it's like my subconscious is trying to warn me that they're going to use you against me. This definitely feels like foreshadowing that Xaden will, in fact, level up in veninous. And I really hate that a lot. I do not like the implications
I know.
of that.
I mean, he's literally been telling us from the beginning of the book, it's not if, it's when. And so I'm not okay, but I'm prepared for it, honestly. I really am.
Right. Okay, so that's like another layer to all of this that makes me feel like this dream is like present tense influencing. Because the sage already knew that Xaden is venin, but now he's trying to get him to level up and turn ace him so that he can nab him up.
He can nab him up. He can zaddy nap him.
Yeah. But it also calls back to when Theophanie referred to Violet as being an effective leash, quote unquote, and then how in the dream from chapter 45, the sage tells Xaden if he doesn't come to him, he says, then you'll find I have ways to bring you to heal, as in with the leash, that is Violet, perhaps?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. It seems like to me they're just going to straight up kidnap Violet because they know Xaden will come flying. Literally. But then I also wonder what would Theophanie or Berwyn or really any of the venin do about Taryn and Sorrengail? Because Taryn would burn down the world if they tried to take Violet. But then again, venin are fireproof and they have wyvern, so I don't know. But I mean, they know that Violet is his biggest weakness. I mean, he literally turned venin for her. So all they have to do is put Violet in a dangerous, compromising position. And Xaden he'll drain all of Navarre. He don't care. Also, this is probably the dumbest question I could pose. But could Taryn kill a venin just by straight up eating him or like biting his head off or any other notable form of dismemberment? I'm really sorry for the graphic nature of the question, but it just came to me as I was trying to think through like how Taryn and or Sorrengail could stop Theophanie or Berwyn if they tried to take Violet. And I'm like, if a dragon consumes you, wouldn't you be dead? I don't know.
I honestly don't know. I guess the venin kind of use the wyvern to go against the dragons, and then the venin themselves go after the riders. And then we get like signet battles between them or whatever. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Obviously,
they're not made of steel,
but then,
they're flesh.
I guess the question is like, can venin use a signet against a dragon?
I think it depends on the signet. Like, I would think Theophanie could strike Taryn with lightning. Like I said, I know it's a really dumb question, but I was just like, why doesn't Taryn just literally bite Theophanie's head off and then be like, well, that was done. What's she gonna do?
We'll have to think on that. So to move on, Violet goes on to recall every dream that she's had with the sage, and it turns out Xaden has had every single one of them. I also was curious about when Xaden tells Violet he wants me to deliver you, and Violet argues back they have their own lightning wielder. I gotta be honest, I give it like a little bit of a Violet what at this point, because I'm like, girl, Theophanie already told you she doesn't want you ending up with Berwyn. So why are you thinking that they're on the same team? I guess Violet just hasn't pieced it together yet, but I find that kind of weird and like lightly inconsistent with her character.
Yeah, I have some thoughts about this as we continue. I think there are a couple times where I'm like, did Violet suddenly become dumb in Onyx Storm? Because it kind of feels that way. In relation to this, in reality, who gives a fuck if they have a lightning wielder? Who cares if they had a dozen lightning wielders? Why would the venin not want to add another extremely powerful lightning wielder to their ranks? Like, duh, Violet. I don't know. That just seems like such a dumb, like, they want me? What? I'm not special. Like, girl, you know you are. Okay, just stop. Just stop.
I don't
Like,
know.
Violet, wake up, baby. Wake up.
Violet goes on to mention the super visceral memory that she had in Samara, and it turns out that this was Marin's dream. Honestly, I was not expecting it to be Marin's. I definitely still thought that that dream was going to be related to Kat, so I was very surprised by this, I will admit.
Oh, yeah. When this was finally revealed, so many pieces clicked into place. I was like, oh. I will say I still don't understand the whole you're the future queen of Tyrrendor thing, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But it was like, now it makes sense. Because that was such a random thing to throw in. In hindsight, I'm like, that should have been a glaring alarm. But of course, you know, hindsight's 2020.
But in relation to Marin's dream, Violet asked Xaden what he knew about the fall of Cliffsbane, thinking that Marin's nightmare must have been from that day. I had to refresh myself on Cliffsbane Fall. So back in chapter 25 of Iron Flame, there is a note that gets leaked in Battle Brief announcing that the city of Zoya in the Breivik province of Peromiel had fallen to, quote, blue fire dragons and their riders, aka the venin and their wyvern. At the time, Markham had tried to pass it off as propaganda since Navarre was still trying to keep venin a secret. Later on in chapter 40 of Iron Flame, when the Sorrengail siblings take it upon themselves to meet with Viscount Takaris to negotiate for a luminary, we learn that Cliffsbane Academy was in Zoya, and since its fall, a third of the flyers had been moved to stay in Takaris' palace in Corden. In retrospect, this all makes sense because when you go back and read the nightmare in chapter 9, we saw there was like the blue flames bursting through the windows. Kat is there as well, so presumably they are in their room at Cliffsbane Academy. Kat is trying to tug Marin out while she rummages through the trunk in the room looking for a portrait of her family, all of whom have honey brown eyes. I don't know why I didn't hone in on that detail.
I know.
Read it because...
Oh, we're so good at focusing on eye color too. And I'm like, we missed that one. Like, the only person who's described with honey brown eyes. Oh, I'm embarrassed.
It went right over my head. Didn't piece it together at all. But I will say the whole part about Violet as Marin telling Kat she had to live because she's the future queen of Tyrrendor is still super odd. Cliffsbane Academy in Zoya fell after Kat and Xaden had already called off their little marriage arrangement. So did this dream also have some foretelling properties with things that have not happened yet? Will someone become a queen? But as you, Addison, pointed out in our episode for chapters 7 through 12, how can you be the queen of Tyrrendor unless Tyrrendor becomes independent? Or they're just talking about, I don't know, maybe the queen of Navarre, but that seems also kind of weird.
No, it still bothers me. It doesn't make sense. As we discussed in the episode with the dream, Kat is not in line for the throne of Tyrrendor. As a matter of fact, Tyrrendor doesn't have a king or queen. They have a duke. So best case, she would be a duchess. Kat is in line for the throne of Peromiel. So it's still on to me and not something I feel like I can ignore. Whenever I read something like that, I think, Rebecca Yarros must have gotten confused and made a mistake, or it's something important. And I don't think that Rebecca Yarros made that mistake. That wasn't like oops, I meant to put Peromiel and I wrote Tyrrendor, right? So if those are the two options, I'm like, okay, like clearly that's meant to be indicative of something.
We do know that Hedotus was sitting there being like, Tyrrendor
they were trying
to become independent. And as we discussed, Tyrrendor literally has everything that they need basically at this point. So I don't know.
It's just still odd that Marin would say that too.
Well, I think it's because, again, even like in this dream with Xaden, Violet's interpreting things as she would because she hadn't realized yet that she was in someone else's dream. So I still think there's like some subconscious intermingling
blending
things happening because Violet didn't know that she was dreamwalking. She was just interpreting things as she was seeing them. So that's what I
fair.
think was going on, at least.
Yeah. Until we learn more about the signet, there's no way to know for sure.
So upon realizing Violet had entered into Marin's dream as well, Xaden realizes this was not just because of their bond. In fact, Violet's second signet, thanks to Adarna, must be a Dreamwalker. First and foremost, how do you feel about this second signet reveal? Are you a fan? Not a fan? Are you indifferent? I am definitely excited to know that this is her signet. However, I'm also just a little bit peeved because I don't feel like it was as obvious as Rebecca made it sound. Now that we know, you can probably go back and revisit the nightmares from Iron Flame and be like, oh yeah, I can see these details that indicate they weren't Violet's dreams. But I don't feel like it was as obvious as it has been with the dreams that we've gotten in Onyx Storm.
I have pretty mixed feelings about it. I'm probably in the very solidly neutral camp with maybe like a slight tinge of negativity. A lot of my thoughts are like, on the one hand this, but the other hand this. So for example, on the one hand, I like that the signet is unique and something we've never been exposed to. But on the other hand, I wish there had been the tiniest of hints or foreshadowing. Like a singular passing comment that said, I once read a tome that rumored of a rider or venin or whoever that could walk through the dreams of others. Just something that would have been like, oh my gosh, this tiniest little hint, because we literally did not even know Dreamwalking existed until this moment. And not that it's not okay to introduce new concepts, but like, I don't know. I did, however, like the explanation for the need that the signet came from and her need for Adarna, and how unique it was to her relationship with Darna. I am also excited to see what she can do with this signet, but I am also a little hesitant at yet another form of magic being introduced that will likely be complex. I feel like it has the potential to become very convoluted very quickly. I also have some serious questions around how Violet is actually going to quote unquote train and learn about this signet in any meaningful way. One, because she can't tell anyone. And two, even if she could, there's no one else that has it and that can train her on it. And with everything else going on, I'm not sure I want to add another struggle of Violet's that we have to read through in books 4 and 5. I'm already so overwhelmed with the elements of this story that I'm like, now you want to add something else for Violet to do? There's so much that we don't know. And so in this moment, I'm not super excited at the prospect of an entirely new, unprecedented signet that we have to struggle through to learn about for another 600 pages in the next book. I'm realizing as I'm saying all of this, it sounds a little bit more negative than I mean it to, but it really depends on how it goes in the next book, which is not a super fair assessment. So that's why I'm like mostly neutral. I feel like a little bit it's trust the process.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately what we're going to have to do is just to wait and see what actually can happen. I do have a couple thoughts about the implications of dreamwalking in a little bit, but I was going to say if Berwyn is a dreamwalking venin, then oh, well, maybe that's why they're like, we could teach you. Well, because they want her to turn venin, but then after the fact, they could teach her about the dreamwalking signet.
Well, you're assuming they know about it. They only know about her lightning. Violet didn't even know she was a dreamwalker. How would they?
Oh, that's true. I guess, yeah, point B. Berwyn does have dreamwalking, though. So unless there's like some kind of encountering that happens between them, well, he's probably not going to teach her.
No.
We don't want everybody to be venin. I'm just saying, assuming that Berwyn is in fact a dreamwalker, then he is another character now that has that signet. But
True.
It feels, unlikely that they're going to like work together to learn about their signet.
I don't think Birkenstock, Berwyn, and Violet are going to team up. I think that's going to be a no, Lorraine.
Yeah, that's a no for me, dog. Yeah. Okay. So, second, Xaden states it's absolutely more dangerous than lightning. It's a form of intrinsic because Violet can walk straight into someone's mind while they are unconscious.
My first question is, how the fuck would Xaden know anything about this? He seems pretty confident in calling her a dreamwalker, and I want to know what he knows that makes him feel confident enough to just diagnose Violet with the signet. How would he know anything about that? Yeah. Sometimes Xaden just does this thing where he just immediately knows something, and I'm like, how could you possibly know that?
It's either they know things and they just state them, or everybody lies to us, and so then you're all just confused about who knows what. We don't even know if Xaden is correct, though, because he says this, and I think you're supposed to take it, I guess, at face value. But unless Xaden has secrets still that he's not telling anybody about, then how would you know that this is a type of intrinsic specifically? See, that's what confuses me about some of these things, because people's signets are getting lumped into like an overarching category, but then they're still distinct. And I think I brought this up before with like Dane stuff or whatever, right? Is Dane considered an intrinsic with his memory reading signet? Or are we keeping those as distinct things? So anyways, as far as implications for Violet's signet goes, I do think it is pretty interesting. Dreams are often places where we subconsciously process things about ourselves and things that have happened and explore our fears and desires in a passive manner. The fact that you can just waltz into a person's unguarded mind and see or feel all of their deeper desires and fears does have potential to be really dangerous, because you can use that knowledge to manipulate someone's actions. And we see that very clearly happening with the sage's interactions with Xaden in his dreams. And to continue with that thought, the sage knows that something happening to Violet is Xaden's worst fear. And therefore, he can find ways to exploit that. Not only that, but we see him actively calling to Xaden in the dream. And over time, that could convert to him consciously making that decision after hearing it enough times. It's like dream subliminal messaging, or like Inception, I guess, right? Inception, quite literally Inception.
Yeah. This is honestly an excellent example, so chef's kiss to you. I love this.
I also find it interesting that when Violet asks Darna to confirm, she says, "I did not choose it any more than Taryn chose lightning, but you have been known to wander while dreaming. It's harmless. You're mostly drawn to him," talking about Xaden. Following this, Violet starts recounting how signets are based on a writer's unique bond and the power of the dragon, and she realizes that she must have developed this signet while Darna had been in the dreamless sleep, because she wasn't able to access her. So I had to pause because I got a little confused. When we met the Irids in the last episode, we had picked apart Leothan's comment when he was like, "You gifted your human with ice," referring to Atram, and then to Taryn he had said, "You armed yours with lightning." And to Indarna, he said she'd handed Violet something far more dangerous to wield. And we were like, oh, like, does that mean dragons are the ones that baby gift and decide what signet someone has? So then Indarna saying this was confusing, because I feel like we're getting another one step forward, two steps back situation where there's conflicting explanations. I don't know if I necessarily believe Indarna's conclusion though, because we do see later she barely knows anything about how her magic works. And she unknowingly changed a magical bond so that she could bond Violet. And so it's the blind leading the blind, I guess.
Those are my thoughts as well. Because remember, even Riddick is like, "Hey, that's not how signets work," gets cut off. And immediately we were like, the Empyrean is lying to us, which I still stand by. Don't trust them. They're sketchy as hell. I don't believe that Indarna is being misleading in any way. I think she genuinely believes what we have been led to believe, that a signet is based on the need of a writer and the unique chemistry between a writer and their dragon. But remember, Indarna was raised by the Empyrean. She knows literally nothing about the Irids and what their capabilities are. It's clear based on the conversation with the Irids, there is a lot to know. And so I still stand by our analysis that the comments made about dragons gifting and choosing their rider's signet is extremely weird and something that will definitely come up again, probably as we learn more about the Irids. So I don't take Indarna's comment here as solid world building, that that's actually how signets work.
Okay, agreed. I also wondered if Violet being drawn to Xaden in her dreams as well will maybe serve as that compass, quote unquote, for him. Will she always be able to find him or talk to him by walking into his dreams?
I love this idea. Even if he turns full venin and their bond is broken, she could still be able to reach him that way. And so if, as we're starting to speculate, Vaden goes full Vaden, if Xaden goes full venin and he goes off with Berwin or Theophanie or whatever, this could be a way that they still are able to reach each other, and maybe a way that Violet can ultimately help bring Xaden back from the dark side.
Another thought that I had was, I found it interesting that the dragons enter a dreamless sleep when they grow. And now we learn that there is a dreamwalking signet. Why would a dragon's growth stage need to be dreamless? Is there something about dragons and dreaming that is more dangerous than we know so far? And it also has me thinking about Indarna and her seemingly kind of precognitive abilities at times. That's speculative. I just feel like Indarna sometimes has this like cognition. Along that line, we've seen how she waited to hatch and bond Violet specifically, and the fact that she's always leaving places to be where she's needed. And when you combine that with some of the details of the nightmares and how they feel like they do have elements of like premonition or foreshadowing for things to come, it does make you wonder if there's a link there between the dreams of dragons and like a dreamwalking signet developing. I don't know, just food for thought. So another thing that I want to call attention to is that Xaden says it makes sense this is Violet's second signet because his signet doesn't work on dragons, and I'm guessing yours doesn't either. So you unknowingly developed it on a human. I'm going to take that as truth. However, we see later that Leothan continues insisting how dangerous Violet's second signet is, and I have to wonder why he keeps saying that.
Twin, where have you been? Immediately when I read that, I was like, I bet this is 100% accurate. And Tinsink signets don't work on dragons, but I bet Violet's will.
We do often see that a lot of the information that turns out to be true, or like these little Easter egg hints, come up in these like phrases that seem to doubt something, but then they turn out to be true. I don't know. But I was also thinking if these dreams do in fact have some precognition property, when you combine it with Violet meddling, I was wondering, is Leothan worried because Violet could alter reality or the future perhaps with these dreams?
I don't think she can alter reality or the future with this signet, but I do think it could make her privy to the secrets of the Empyrean and give her access to knowledge that would have big consequences, because we know next to nothing about the Empyrean. I still think about that excerpt from Kaori that was like, we know as much about dragons, but that's not near as much as we don't know, or however it's phrased. And as I've said multiple times throughout our coverage, this book is called the Empyrean series, not the Violet and Xaden series. There's little to nothing about the Empyrean. And there's so many questions about the history of dragons and riders and venin. And I just think the Empyrean is holding on to some deep, deep secrets. And so it could make her privy to those if she can dreamwalk into the minds of dragons, which would be amazing. That would be amazing.
Yeah, maybe we can finally get some damn answers in this.
Maybe.
Theophanie hasn't given us anything. I keep waiting for Theophanie to be, or like for these meetings with Theophany to be crazy significant for us to be like, oh my God.
She's such a tease.
Some big truth is revealed. Yeah, but instead we end up with more questions. So it's time to go to the dragons. But okay, so I only asked about the meddling thing and altering reality because Violet, at least in the dreams that she's entered so far, by screaming wake and like telling Xaden to come out of the dream, I feel like she's been sort of stalling or delaying Xaden turning ASIM. Does that make sense? By her being in this dream and interfering and stopping it, it may not change the fact that he does potentially turn ASIM. I don't want that to happen, but at least up to this point, it feels like Violet's interference perhaps has been delaying it, if that makes sense.
I mean, maybe, but I'm hard-pressed to believe that the thing that's been delaying Xaden's full turning is Violet interfering in his dreams at random. I think it's much more likely the love he feels for Violet, his drive to keep her safe and be close to her, is much more impactful than the handful of times she's been like, wake up, you know?
Maybe. No, I don't know. Anyways, the conversation starts shifting into the implications of a signet like this, with Xaden noting he can only read someone while they're awake, but since people can't shield while sleeping, she could potentially walk straight into Melgren's own dreams and he couldn't stop you. But obviously, this fact makes it imperative that no one find out because leadership would kill her for this signet, according to Xaden. I found it particularly interesting that Xaden mentions Melgren specifically. Like, is that just to illustrate the danger of her signet because she can infiltrate the highest ranking and most classified information of a person through their dreams? Or is this some foreshadowing that we got to keep an eye on Melgren?
Well, hey, remember what I said about Aaric maybe being Melgren's balance because Melgren is possibly a venin. I think that's possible. I think it's more likely that Melgren is the highest ranking Navarian official besides King Tari and Halden.
Okay.
And so having access to his mind would give her unprecedented information that could be potentially damning. So maybe a little bit of both.
This also leads me to wonder if by Xaden calling a Dreamwalker a type of intrinsic, is it alluding to the fact that you could possibly explore all types of thoughts or knowledge of someone while they are asleep, not just the things that they are dreaming about?
That's a very interesting thought. I guess in a way, like possibly she could have power like Dane in that once she's in someone's mind through their dreams, she could hypothetically search through their memories and things like that. That's a very interesting possibility. I'm not going to take it off the table because I feel like we know about 3% of what Violet can do with this signet. We know that she can enter someone's dream. We know that she can see it through their eyes. And we know that she can at least make someone aware. Like Xaden feels like someone's watching. And that's about it, which is basically nothing. And I highly doubt Leothan is like, that's so dangerous, if that's all it is. So I think it's possible.
Right. Now, in terms of the signet in relation to venin, I did feel like it's pretty interesting because, I mean, there has to be some highly useful information inside the mind of a venin. Or if Violet can subconsciously influence the venin or something, then that would be super cool.
Oh my gosh, yes, Lorraine. Remember back in chapter 43 when Violet is telling Riddick about Xaden, she says, I don't have all the answers, Riddick. I just know I have to find them, whether they're in a forgotten book or some dark wielder's head.
Ooh.
Yeah, baby. Yep. So that line in connection with your question, maybe. I don't know. But we'll find out. Or we won't. I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. Xaden seems convinced that if anyone found out about this, they would kill Violet immediately. My question for you is, do you really think that leadership would automatically kill Violet if they found out she was a Dreamwalker?
I think we need more information about what Dreamwalking can do. If we're taking what Xaden is saying as truth, then we know Navarre kills people for being an intrinsic. So then if Dreamwalking is considered a form of intrinsic, and that's what we can expect Violet to be able to do, is just have access to all of somebody's thoughts through a dream in a subconscious state, then I could see the possibility of Navarre being like, yeah, that's too dangerous. We're gonna get rid of you.
See, I'm inclined to say no because Violet is their most valuable weapon against the venin, as Xaden says. And she's bonded to Tarn. And I feel like they're not stupid enough to risk the wrath of Tarn, and by proxy Sorrengail, not to mention the whole, if Violet dies, then Tarn could die, then Sorrengail and Xaden. And they really need all of them. Not to mention, there would be huge political ramifications. If Navarre assassinated Violet, Xaden would literally destroy Navarre brick by brick, and any political dealings with Tyrrendor would be done for. Tyrrendor would declare independence. There would be a civil war. And so I think Navarre has to know that, right?
Potentially, but I guess it just depends on, like, are the secrets that they're hiding by killing off intrinsics and making intrinsics illegal, is that worth it to them? Are their secrets worth more than having Violet as a power? I guess is really the big question. And we don't have the answer to that.
I mean, in a way, yes. My assumption was the reason they killed intrinsics, starting way back in Fourth Wing, is because they didn't want any writer finding out about the existence of venin. That was the most prized information they're protecting. Now the secret's out, everyone knows it. And so are there really that many more earth-shattering secrets like that they need to protect? Maybe. I don't know what else it could be hiding that's bigger than the existence of dark wielders.
Well, if venin are in leadership, though,
but that's specific to leadership, not Navarre.
True. I don't know. I still have more information I'd like from Navarre because I just have a lot of questions about their decision to hide all of this information in the first place, their decision to erase and change so much history so that people couldn't even look for potential answers to this now. I don't know. It's all crazy to me.
It's a mess.
Yeah. We won't have answers to that in this book, I don't think. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see how it unfolds. So the most interesting implication regarding Violet's dreamwalking ability is that Xaden states Violet meddled in his dream. He had wanted to channel from the ground, and yet he'd raised his arm instead. So this is what I was alluding to earlier. I do wonder what the implications of meddling in a dream are. We know that Xaden did, in fact, channel at Biscayeth the first time, but as I mentioned earlier, perhaps these recurring dreams and Violet's interference are her attempts to keep him from channeling again and therefore keep him at an initiate rank. Alternatively, just in regards to meddling in general, part of me wonders if you meddle in a dream, will it manifest in real life in some way?
I think it really depends on the dream. Xaden is dreaming about his actions in the past, / a little bit with the future with Drathus in the background. So, for example, even if Violet stopped him from channeling in the dream, which it seems like she does, it won't change what already happened. The only way I could see it working like that is if Violet manipulates someone's emotions or thoughts that makes them act differently or make a different choice in the present. Thus, that would alter the future, but it would really depend on the person, the dream, and the decision, and the magnitude of that choice.
So as much as I do love the idea of meddling in a dream to change the outcome of something potentially, I do wonder if that becomes the case with this signet, if that would end up making Violet kind of overpowered. Like being able to see someone's deepest fears and desires, and then you also get to interfere in their dreams and change outcomes. That definitely seems like you're toeing the line.
Fair enough. But most dreams, and when I say most, I basically mean all of them. I think Xaden is an exception because of his connection to the sage, but most dreams aren't visions of the future. And so I don't think that's going to become a thing at this time. At least I don't.
Okay. To confirm once and for all that Violet is indeed a dreamwalker, they go to ask Merrin one simple thing: to see the portrait of her family Violet saw in Merrin's dream. Violet recognizes the family in the portrait that Merrin shows them as matching what she saw in the dream, despite never having seen this picture previously. Violet also asks if Merrin is worried about losing it, to which Merrin responds, "That used to be my worst nightmare, actually, until I lived through losing them." So this comment is another thing that made me wonder if there is some premonition situations going on, because in the nightmare, the portrait was dropped in the fire. And as we saw later in Newhall, Theophanie killed Merrin's parents in chapter 10. And so that's kind of why I was like, what if it hadn't dropped into the fire? What would have happened? Is this making sense? Because Merrin's worst nightmare is for her to lose her family. She still has the portrait, but the portrait was dropped into the fire. And then directly after that, literally Newhall is being burned by wyvern and stuff too. And Theophanie kills Merrin's parents. And then Merrin lives through and experiences that nightmare. You know what I mean?
True, but I think Merrin is saying that losing the portrait of her family used to be her worst nightmare until she actually lost them. So that's why the dream manifests in her losing the portrait, because that was her deepest fear, because that was her most prized possession.
Right. But I think I'm getting confused because they're talking about Violet meddling in these dreams. And that feels like it's going to come up and become important. Violet was indeed entering into Merrin's dream. And I was wondering if some meddling did occur, specifically with the portrait situation.
I don't think so. I don't think Violet meddled in that dream. I think she was just an observer.
I don't know. Maybe this is something we need people to text us about and tell us your opinions on, because I feel like these dreams do have some premonition foretelling properties going on with them. And I find it really notable that Xaden tells Violet that she meddled in his dream. And it makes me wonder to what extent. Anyways, that's all I will say right now. That is how I feel about these dreams. But that may not be the case. Addison does not feel the same.
No.
And is interpreting these differently.
No, and that's okay. I mean, it's a brand new concept. I don't think Violet really does meddle. If she is doing it, she's not aware of it. I think she has the capability to. I think that will be part of deepening and manifesting her signet. But I don't think she's doing any meddling in Merrin's dream. And I don't really think that she did any meddling in Xaden's, short of trying to stop him from channeling. But I don't think she's really altered anything yet. I don't think she knows that she can.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Who the fuck knows?
We'll see.
Who the fuck knows?
Unfortunately, to end this chapter, everyone is forced into action because they are under attack. Ain't nothing can ever just be easy in this book.
Nope. Anytime we're about to get some critical info, we get interrupted.
So that ends chapter 50. Moving on to chapter 51, the excerpt. This was from a work titled Tactics Part 2 by Lieutenant Lyron Panchek. Panchek states it's best to station riders close to their home villages because nothing is more effective than seeing one's home on fire. First of all, that's fucked up, Panchek. Second, I guess it could be effective. But I also feel like it would be distracting. For me, if I saw my family member in immediate danger in front of me, I would probably go try and help them. Like, I would
Yeah.
get derailed from my mission. So then is that really good strategy in that case? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, aside from that, I do think that this ties into what Reedy tells the squad when she says most of us have family here, so fight like it in this chapter. So who knows? I guess it is motivating. I also started wondering, why are we getting excerpts from Panchek? I think this is the second excerpt we've gotten from him in this book. I could be wrong about that, but this is definitely not the first time that we've had one from him. Ultimately, I was like, who the fuck cares about Panchek? Unless, as you've been saying, Panchek is venin, or working with the venin, and is thus a traitor. And maybe getting these excerpts from him is a little hint of that.
Of all your analysis in this episode, that's my favorite. That's my favorite that I'm probably right. And also, who the fuck cares about Panchek? You know what I'm saying? If you recall, way back at the beginning of the book, when we first started discussing who in leadership is venin, I put Panchek at the top of my list. I still think about the conversation way back in Fourth Wing when Panchek is first introduced, and it's discussed that Panchek wants Melgren's job. And Violet says it will never happen because Melgren is bonded to Coda and has the most perfect signet in the world for commander of all the armies of Navarre. Panchek would obviously be extremely jealous and resentful of that, and it's starting to sound a lot like Jack Barlow's logic. Jack Barlow was enraged that Taryn bonded Violet, and remember he said in the War Chamber, why should they being the dragons, get to determine how much power we can have? I think there is a distinct parallel between Panchek's experience and Jack's. Panchek's signet, the strength of his dragon, hold him back from what he really wants. So I'm just saying, that really kind of supports my theory. But ultimately, I think this excerpt is just another example of the psychotic mentality of Besgaiath War College. And I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
If I saw my family's home burning, I'd be like, well, fuck all those other riders in my mission. I'm out. You know, like it's bizarre, fucked up college.
The frenzy begins in Ryerson House as everyone swarms the hall to prepare. And ever since you pointed this out, I feel like I've noticed it a lot more, but I laughed when Taryn relays that there's a few dozen wyvern heading their way. And then he says, 20 minutes out, maybe less. I'm on my way to you. And as you mentioned before, like Taryn is quite literally never close by. He's always somewhere else.
Dude, yes, I'm telling you, not once has Taryn ever been right there when danger is imminent. I mean, when you think back to Threshing, that is quite literally the origin of their bond. Violet was in trouble. Taryn was far away. She almost died. He showed up just in the nick of time to help Violet. It's every single time.
Violet tells Andarna to go guard the Wardstone, while Brennan fills Xaden in on how many riders were out on patrol and in residence.
Just a quick world building note. To our knowledge, there are 3 different kinds of wyvern. So far, we've only been able to distinguish them by the color of fire they blow. There are blue fire wyverns, green fire, and red fire. Violet confirms for us in this chapter that if they can fly really fast, so fast that they can outfly a dragon, then they are green fire wyvern. I did several ebook checks, and those are the only descriptive details we get. We don't know anything else about blue fire wyvern or red fire or what their special powers are or anything like that.
So notably, things are chaotic because since Tyrrendor regained control of their own forces, many of the riders were already out overseeing the outposts in Tyrrendor, while their 2 generals, Suri and Ulysses, were also out in different cities, which leaves Xaden to command his army as the Duke.
More specifically, Brennan tells Xaden in his debrief about what's happening that Tyrrendor basically took control of all the outposts within Tyrrendor's borders from Navarrian riders and staffed them with Auratian riders. This has made Auratia specifically vulnerable because now they're undermanned. Also indicates that there's still a pretty clear division between Navarrian riders and Auratian riders.
Ultimately, Xaden tasks Felix with watching over the first years and Aaric and instructs infantry to get to the posts and the riders to run faster. As a note about Aaric's presence, a Prince of Navarre dying would obviously make things much worse for Tyrrendor, considering the already rocky political environment with Tyrrendor's decision to take civilians. and Xaden's refusal to sign another provincial commitment. So it's pretty imperative that Aaric stays alive and unharmed.
Ooh, yeah. Did not think of that. I think if Aaric died defending Eurasia, Halden would attack Tyrrendor even without permission from Tari. I think he would just fuck it up. So, yeah, that's a really good point.
I would also like to point out that Aaric pauses on the landing above, his brow furrowing, before Felix practically shoves him down the hall. That was like such a "that's so Raven" moment for Aaric, and we'll circle back on that detail very shortly.
That is the best possible reference for Aaric. And now I will be singing the theme song for that show for the rest of the day. I can hear it in my mind now.
We can change it to Aaric. That's so Aaric.
It's the future he can see. I like how you and I have both
far
just
as
accepted that has precognition, even though it's not confirmed. We're just like, yeah, he can see the future.
I don't know what else it would
But I
be
mean,
at this
come
point.
on,
I'm like,
yeah,
he's
like,
done way. He's
if
done way
not,
too
I'm
many
gonna be
suspicious
mad.
things that I'm like, how does you know?
I'm gonna be mad.
Exactly. As far as command for the riders goes, Xaden splits the retired riders between guarding the Wardstone and spreading throughout the city to help civilians, and then Violet is also ordered to man the wall at her insistence. The second and third years also insist on riding, so Dane splits them accordingly. The third years will go to the east gate of the city, and the second years will go with Rhiannon to the north of the city. As everyone departs with their orders, an argument between Xaden and Bodhi breaks out. Basically, Xaden doesn't want Bodhi out fighting because he is first in line to take over Tyrrendor should anything happen to Xaden. But Bodhi is furious because he understandably wants to fight and defend his home. I think Bodhi is struggling with feeling undervalued. He says, "Because I'm not a weapon like you are, Kira and I are just as deadly in the air." I understand both perspectives. Xaden is worried about losing Tyrrendor after their family just got back control of it, while Bodhi just wants to fight and defend it as he's been trained as a rider to do for most of his life. So
I imagine Bodhi has been feeling this way for a while. Remember, he makes a few comments about how he wished that he could be on the quest squad to help search for the Irids. It seems to me like Bodhi is often left behind in basically all situations. And I think in large part, that is because, number one, he's a year younger, so of course he can't be with them all the time. And number two, even before Xaden got Tyrrendor back, it always seemed like Bodhi was Xaden's second in command. Logically, anytime Xaden would leave Besgaia to do anything, Bodhi is the most trustworthy and senior person of rank he can trust to run things with the marked ones when Xaden is not there. I think Bodhi has always been that person for Xaden, even before the whole mess of, he's the Duke of Tyrrendor and all of that. I think Bodhi kind of says that in their argument. He's like, I'll be your right hand forever, but
yeah.
I ain't gonna run
This
shit.
is not the first time that we've talked about this, but the sentiment is building, I guess. So Xaden and Violet also exchange a quick kiss and some words before they separate for their respective roles as well.
Before they depart, Xaden tells Violet, "I love you more than the city and do not die defending it." Violet then thinks, Tyrrendor, Xaden, our relationship, me. It's hard to love someone in power. Already we see this is exactly what Llewellyn was talking about. In Xaden's words here, but also his actions. He abandons its post when he feels that Violet is in trouble, which we will discuss more later. Also, leave it to Taryn to just add fuel to the fire when he tells Violet, "Do not worry for him. He wins no matter how this battle goes." And I was like, Taryn, really? And as Violet says, he really is just being an ass. He's always got to do Xaden so dirty.
Taryn's
it makes me
being
mad.
The objective one.
Yeah, he and Mira, man, they're twins.
Well, somebody does have to have some logic because, as we see,
it ain't Violet.
Secret logic to love.
Bro.
At this point. So next, Aaric comes up and says something super odd considering the situation. He tells Violet, "You have to protect Dune's temple. The temple is outside the walls. It's how you save Tyrrendor." Violet is confused as fuck, wondering if maybe he made some deal without telling them, and also realizes Quest Squad hadn't made an alliance with Umbriel. So, what is this all about?
I will interject at random points, but as soon as I saw the word Dune's temple, I was like, all right, I'm head out because Lorraine has got this one.
And you are correct, because I do indeed have some thoughts. So just a bit ago, Aaric paused on the steps, furrowing his brows as if he's thinking. He also fights for words, trying to warn Violet like he doesn't quite know why he needs to tell Violet to protect Dunne's temple. We have been speculating about Aaric's signet. I feel like this is a pretty clear example of Aaric experiencing some sort of vision or impulse that prompted him to give Violet this warning. Now, my opinion, though, is that I don't think Aaric is fully aware yet that this is potentially his signet. And that's why he can't clearly explain or articulate why he's giving this warning. Regardless, it seems pretty clear that Aaric has precognition at this point. I also have some other thoughts on why Dunne's temple specifically is, as Aaric says, the key to save Tyrrendor, which is code for I have a huge pot of God talk cooking, and I will save that for later.
It's interesting to me that you read it that way because I had a whole different interpretation of this conversation. First, let me just say I wholeheartedly agree that Aaric has precognition at this point. All of the evidence we discussed in the last episode plus the scene just adds up to that. Okay, so we are going to operate that this is canon. Here is where I differ, though. I do think that Aaric is fully aware he has manifested and what his signet is. Of course, he's still just a first year that just manifested, so I don't think he has full control or mastery of it by any means. But when he says no, he shakes his head, then seems to fight for words. I took that to mean like he's struggling to find a way to convey to her how he knows this without straight up just telling her about his signet. Because to our knowledge, no one knows. They still think Aaric hasn't manifested.
True.
This then begs the question, why would Aaric be hesitant to share what his signet is? Not just in this moment, but why hasn't he told anyone yet? And Addison prepared a TED Talk. In this moment, it's not, you're like, oh shit. You're like, damn, that's a wall of text. In this moment, it is not an opportune time to share with Violet. There's an imminent battle coming. There's chaos and people running around everywhere. And he may not want to be overheard. Additionally, precognition would be an incredibly rare, powerful, and coveted signet to have. It's possible he wants basically no one except leadership to know his signet. Take Dane, for example. His signet is retrocognition, and it seems like it was basically classified from everyone except leadership. And I assume it would be the same for Aaric's, because that would be incredibly valuable to have as a weapon, especially if people don't know about it. Because once the general populace knows, it may affect how they make decisions, which could impact Aaric's ability to see their decision-making process, right? Aaric's signet would also be a direct competitor for General Melgren's signet. Melgren is not someone you want to fuck around with. And given the untrustworthy nature of Navarian leadership, it would stand to reason that Aaric would not want Melgren specifically to find out because he might try to have Aaric killed to protect his position. We know that there are traitors in Navarian leadership. We know it's very cutthroat, and I don't think Melgren is above killing someone to keep the position he has as general of all of Navarre's armies. This leads me to my last point. If Aaric has precognition, it's also possible he foresaw something bad happening if/when he tells someone about his signet at a certain time or place. And he wants to see if the future changes or basically do whatever is within his control to avoid that situation. And so there are a lot of implications to precognition and how it affects decision-making. And so for all of these reasons, I think that he does know, and that's why he hasn't told anyone. And thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Okay. Those are good points. I definitely agree. Yeah, I mean, if people know and if he is a direct competitor to someone in leadership, then maybe he wouldn't say anything about it. I also like the point about the possibility of interfering with the outcome of something in relation to precognition, because that's always just interesting to think about. So out in the courtyard, Rhee hands out specific orders for the second years and her squad, and then they all take off to the northern part of the city wall. I did find it interesting that Taryn tells Violet perhaps we need to make our own decisions, and as we see, they do end up tweaking orders.
This line immediately made me call back to the conversation Violet and Xaden had on the Isle of Zanal, where he tells Violet, what they never tell us in the quadrant is that rank is well and good, but you and I both know the moment we fly onto the battlefield, it isn't the humans giving commands. You were selected by a general among dragons. And we see as the scene progresses that Taryn and Violet bail and do their own thing almost immediately, sort of proving Xaden's point. Rank is well and good, but
Yeah.
Once Taryn decides, what is Violet going to do? No, Taryn, let me control you. Like, yeah, right. As if.
I also found it interesting that while they fly over the city, Violet notes temple attendants dart into their sanctuaries, except those who serve Zanal. They're on the front steps of their shrine drinking as we pass over. And first of all, I was like, that's unhinged. And second, I guess it is fairly on brand because as we learned in Zelna, those who worship Zanal believe luck determines your fate and they expect people to adjust their sails in a storm. So it seems like this belief is like universal with worshippers on the continent believing similarly as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's the same thing they were doing when Violet and her squad got there. They knew a riot of dragons and griffin riders were going to come to their isle, don't know if they're friendly, don't know what their intentions, and they're out there having a fucking carnival waiting for them. It's deranged, unhinged behavior. And let me just say, Zanal ain't going to be the god for me. I don't need luck. I need love, war, wisdom. No, Zanal isn't helpful. Zanal is random. I don't trust random chance.
Maybe he is, and we don't know.
Oh, yeah. Tell that to Traeger.
But our boy Riddick does love him, and we love Riddick, so.
I know, but tell that to Traeger and Kat, okay?
True. But we did find the Irids because of that, so.
Maybe. We'll see. Zanal ain't for me.
Chaotic is like, or Zanal feels like chaotically neutral to me. Everything is chaotic, but it all evens out in some form or another.
I guess. Like, also, did you say Zanotic?
I did say that. I didn't mean to say that originally.
That's funny. I like it.
Who knows what's coming out of my mouth these ways? These
ways.
Okay.
Maybe do you need some coffee? Okay, you need some tea? You need some little sweet treat?
Okay. So with it being dark outside, Violet summons some lightning, revealing wyvern flying basically everywhere all over the place. Notably, Violet realizes that the wyvern aren't flying in formation as they had in Biscayeth, and Taryn responds either they've traded the security formation in hopes smaller pairings will get through, or they know you're here and formations make a bigger target. Then, after this, why is Violet's thought? That would require some of the Dark Wielders to have escaped Biscayeth. And I was like, girl, what? She has quite literally been told by Jack and had it confirmed in Battle Brief that there are traitors in Navarre and in leadership. So why is she thinking a captured venin must have escaped instead of logically concluding that someone in leadership must have leaked the schedule of what wings and squads would be where, or like whatever it is.
It doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even make sense. If a venin has been fucking locked up in Biscayeth, they don't have any information. If I'm a venin and I'm trapped in Biscayeth and I escape, my ass is running. I'm not going to be like, let me run by the scheduling office so I can let fucking Theophanie. Like, oh my God. Lorraine and I were actually texting about this particular note, and we were both like, what the fuck? Her thought here just makes zero sense. And it's not just Violet making an idiotic conclusion, it's also Taryn. I get maybe not taking Jack Barlow's word for it, but after the fall of Soniva and Devera is literally like, hey guys, there are definitely traitors among our ranks. How does it not occur to either of them that perhaps they have been portrayed? Like, honestly, what the actual fuck? I'm angry about this. This is where, oh my God. See, this is an example of what I was alluding to earlier, that there's these things that happen that are so logical and Violet's thought is so illogical that it feels a little bit like character assassination. You can't be like, Violet has the mind of a scribe. She's the smartest of our generation. Yeah. And then she's like, that's weird. A venin must escape Biscayeth. And for Taryn to be fucking stupid too. I'm sorry. You know what? Whew. I think I need a drink of water because I'm mad.
The Black Dragons from the Doom and Dean line are supposed to be the most clever and the most cunning and all of that too. Mm-hmm. So,
you know what?
Taryn ain't fitting either of them.
Taryn is dishonoring the Doom and Dean line with this stupid shit, okay? He is. I'm sorry I said what I said.
Anyways, I also forgot, though, that Panchek came to Aracia along with Kaori. Those were the two that came in the rotation with the group that went there. Mm-hmm. So that does play pretty perfectly into your speculation that Panchek is a traitor.
Yes.
Because if he was there and he knew everybody who's there, you know.
Yeah. And he was like, attack at this time and place. And maybe, because, you know, we don't know how much Tyrandor is sharing with Navarre about the status of the wards. But I would imagine if I'm Tyrandor, I'm trying to keep that under wraps. I want as few people in general for a variety of reasons to know that information. So maybe Pancheck specifically goes to Tyrandor to get the intel on the wards, and then he's like, Theophanie, come on. Yes, absolutely. 100%. This is canon.
Girl.
Hey, girl.
Hey,
What
girl.
you doing?
Hey, girl. Get over here.
Party at Dune's Temple. Violet will be there with Tyrn. Yeah, absolutely. Canon. This is what happened.
I also had another possible thought, though. What if Xaden was super worried about Violet's dreamwalking, not just because he fears for her safety, but because what if Berwyn was figuring out information about Navarre, Violet, and Tyrandor because he's been in Xaden's mind as a dreamwalker as well?
Ooh, that's an interesting thought. It definitely seems possible. I imagine we're going to learn a whole lot more about what is possible with dreamwalking in the next book, so I think it's totally in the realm of possibilities.
That would go along with Xaden's line of thinking about dreamwalking being a form of intrinsic. And so, if that's true, and Berwyn is the counter to Violet and has this dreamwalking signet as well, he's also venin, has been alive for presumably much longer, then it stands to reason that he's trained it a lot more. And so if then he could go into people's mind, then that does serve as like a potential other option for how the venin knew that they were going to be in Erasia and whatnot. But I'm ultimately still leaning toward the leadership thing. I think that seems more likely to me. Violet summons another extra prolonged strike of lightning in a way she's never managed before for Rhee to be able to see what's going on. I thought it was interesting that she knows my fingertips burn as well while thunder roars louder than any dragon I've come across. So I had kind of a dumb realization. For some reason, I've been thinking of thunder as being this separate thing, but then I remembered that thunder follows lightning, so it makes sense that thunder is rumbling. Like, I always just thought they were separate things, and I was like, oh, it's developing because there's thunder now too. But then I was like, no, Lorraine, no shit. Like, thunder follows lightning, and so that's why. Anyways, with that being said, we do see that Violet's control and skill when it comes to wielding her lightning is increasing, though, and I think that the thunder being much louder is like a reflection of the fact that her overall power is a lot stronger too. And then also on top of that, Tyrn agrees and he's like, impressive. So at this point, Tyrn and Violet make the decision to break orders and separate from the squad because Violet's power should not be wielded in such proximity to civilians. This also causes Rhee and Fierge to follow after them, and Rhee has never left the squad. They end up flying outside the wards, and I found it both kind of funny and alarming when Violet asks Darna, tell me you made it to the ward stone, and she responds, it is well protected. Immediately, I was like, yeah, she ain't by that ward stone. She's going where she's needed.
Same. I didn't even need Violet to be like, hey, wait a minute. And Darna has never once in her life done what she's been told to do. Not even once. So why would she start now?
This is followed by Tyrn slamming into a wyvern and tearing apart like a badass. And then he proudly states, it's been ages since I've honored the color of my scale in such a manner. While Andarna sassily responds, you blended in with the night. Hardly an accomplishment. And A, that was really funny, but B, I was like, okay, that's kind of actually a double whammy because Andarna can do that too, plus more as an Irid. She can be anything. And so she's like, Tyrn, you ain't shit. Like,
basically, she's like, you just blended into the dark. Impressive.
Yeah. The wyvern keep coming with Fierge and Rhee holding their own, and I thought it was so cool when Tyrn grabs a wyvern and then body rolls to snap its neck. I just thought it was... It just sounds really cool.
Yeah. I was also cracking up when it said, holy fucking nausea. Another fun fact about me is that I do not do dizzy under any circumstance. Even when I was a teenager, I could not do it. So if this was me, I'd be done for. Something else, however, this scene made me think about was back in Fourth Wing. Remember, Violet couldn't hold her seat, and it was such a huge deal. And it's mentioned a couple of times that they regularly lose riders during maneuvers because they can't hold their seat. And most of the time, a dragon is not going to catch you or they're not able to. And so reading this scene, I just keep thinking, how in the hell could anyone, not just Violet, whom we know has physical issues that prevent her from being able to hold her seat, but how could anyone, even the strongest, most muscly, whatever person, hold their seat in maneuvers like this? It is absolute insanity. And I've seen this debated before, more so Fourth Wing, Iron Flame timeline. But why can't all the riders just use saddles? It seems like that would be better for literally everyone because in a way, a dragon doesn't want to lose their rider. So they may not do maneuvers like this for fear of their rider actually falling off. It just seems like it'd be better for everyone. Why doesn't everybody have a damn saddle? It just makes sense. It's crazy.
I agree with that. I always thought it was kind of silly. It would also help you focus on other things. Like you can be like, oh, I'm strapped in. Let me look around and use my signet.
Yes.
I don't know.
And also realistically, riders age. And no matter how physically active you are, as you age, there is like muscle atrophy and things like that. You're just not able to do the things that you were able to do when you were 19 years old, full of hormones and rage. And so it seems like it would be beneficial for everyone. This is, again, not important. Just why? Why?
Unless maybe the dragons do secretly help the riders out just a little bit if they're going to do something crazy like that.
Like they put the band of power. I've wondered about that, especially because if there's even a chance that the dragon could die from the emotional devastation if their rider dies, wouldn't you do everything in your fucking power to keep your rider alive? Like, here, baby, let me put a magical seatbelt on you. I got you. It's weird.
Maybe they do secretly do it. It's one of their Empyrean secrets. I did find it notable when Violet can't help it and she reaches down the bond to check on Xaden, only to feel a wall of onyx ice so cold it burns to the touch. And then Violet asks Terran, is Sorrengail all? And then she gets cut off, and then Terran responds, she copes. I was just wondering, how did you interpret that?
I really just took it to mean that despite the difficulties that she and Xaden are having with their relationship, she is coping enough to make sure that they're able to fight together effectively. I thought it was a little odd. And so I did actually think about it. I'm like, why is she even asking about Sorrengail? It's not like she felt like a stab of pain in the bond and she was worried for Xaden and Sorrengail. I don't know. So that's how I interpret it.
Yeah, I got a little worried on a first read because that iciness goes hand in hand with venin taking over. And so then I was like, is Violet worried that venin is affecting Sorrengail as well or something in this moment? But I don't know. It's implying that it's a much more intense iciness than she is used to from him, I guess. Next, as predicted, Dunne is spotted standing in front of Dunne's temple down below as 4 wyvern head straight toward her. And I was like, no, Dunne, no. Violet immediately gathers her power and it says, I gather it, condense it, burn with it, then summon more and more until I am light and heat and energy itself. Not too much, Terran warns, but how can it be too much when I am the very thing I wield? So, first of all, I'm assuming Terran is worried that she'll overchannel and burn out, but this also feels like an ode to the fact that Violet has pure power, and the fact that Violet herself is also acknowledging this felt kind of interesting to me.
That stood out to me too. I wondered if this was some very light foreshadowing that Violet is perhaps a conduit herself, that she is able to channel some greater source of power through herself, and something that she will have to do in a later book if she's been touched by Dunne and she potentially has a special connection to the gods. Like maybe she herself is a conduit for power. That's what it made me think of.
I thought this part was really cool. Violet ends up splitting her lightning into 2 branches, which hit their mark, taking down a pair of wyvern. And I did think it was interesting that just before the lightning strikes, it's noted lightning rends the sky and maybe time. Back in Resin, and Dunne did stop time for Violet to yank the lightning strike where it needed to go. I'm probably being overly suspicious, and I don't think that's what happened here, but who's to say? I'm gonna note it. Also, Violet's power is definitely more intense in this scene. She is literally feeling the burn of her power throughout her entire body, and we see that after the lightning strike, it's noted a thunder shakes the alloy in the conduit, which to me indicates that the strike of lightning was much more intense in power. There's a couple possible reasons that I can think of for why Violet's power seems so much more powerful in this scene. A, they are outside the wards, so Violet feels the magic more intensely. We know that she has stated before that magic feels wilder outside the wards, and Terran always warns her about drawing too much power, particularly when they are outside the wards. B, maybe there is some god power at play here because Violet is favored somehow by Dunne thanks to her partial dedication.
I also wondered if it's partially a proximity thing. Based on the description, she was very close to the wyverns when she struck them down. And maybe that's why the thunder sounded much closer because the strike was closer. To be honest, all of these seem like good explanations to me. So all of them, yes.
Not so fast, however, because we have one more pair of wyvern, and atop one of them is Theophanie. And on top of that, we get a heart-stopping moment as Taryn bellows in pain and he crashes into the ground.
This is the second time in this book I have worried for Taryn's life. And I do not like it. Nothing better happened to Taryn in this book or the next or the next.
I will say now that we've had a couple scenes of like Taryn is about to die or could die or something, it does make me kind of nervous that Taryn is actually going to die at some point.
Absolutely not. How dare you? I've actually thought about that before, and I think Taryn has a little bit of plot armor. I think Violet's lightning that she wields because of Taryn is going to be critical in defeating the venin at the very end. And if Taryn dies, she doesn't have lightning anymore. And I think that's a little bit of plot armor. Girl, what if Taryn is Dunne? Just saying. Then can Taryn die? I don't know. No, but I have thought about that. And I think if there's going to be a big death like that, it would be in the last book.
In the last battle.
Yeah. Plus, she can't kill him in this book because Dunne is gone. So then Violet would die because it is only her bond with Taryn sustaining her life. So
supposedly.
That's true. Oh, God. You'll know what we're talking about in a minute. Just let's keep going.
All right. Moving on to chapter 52. The excerpt. God Watch. This was from Major Rory's Guide to Appeasing the Gods. It states, dedicating oneself to temple work is not only noble, but becoming a high priest or priestess is the closest most of us will get to touching the power of the gods. The rest are writers.
As soon as I read this excerpt for the first time, immediately I was like, oh, hell yeah. Lorraine is going to lose her shit.
Sure was. So I am going to try to contain myself because it's possible I am just interpreting this with some confirmation bias. But I feel like this is implying that becoming a high priest or priestess, in particular, will grant a person a type of power from the gods. Why else would it state that everyone else becomes a writer? Writers are powerful thanks to the signets they develop from the power of their dragons. So why does this excerpt make it sound second tier in the power comparison relative to becoming a high priest or priestess?
I softly agree with you. Granting a person power is such a broad statement to make. Will it grant them magic? Maybe. But when you say power in this context, I think of it more as like they're conduits or mouthpieces for the god or goddess they serve. So they're extremely powerful, but maybe not in the way we think of normally, like how Xaden and Violet are powerful.
True, but if you're going to call them conduits, that's the same thing that the writers are doing with their dragons, though.
Well, maybe conduit's not a good word choice then. They just have a direct line to Dunne. They have a closer connection. They're able to kind of feel the presence, right? But I think power can be interpreted in many ways in that regard.
Fair. They would need to clarify what exactly that means.
Well, yeah.
So I actually definitely feel that there is actual increased power you can get from the gods if you carry their favor or if you go the dedication route. And as we've seen, Violet has been partially dedicated. And to add to that, in the Isle of Umbriel, we learn from chapter 29's excerpt that blood is the preferred sacrifice. We saw 3 main characters spill blood in Umbriel: Xaden, Dane, and Violet. That challenge was also sanctioned by the high priestess there, who makes all the cryptic comments about Violet's dedication not being completed. And in this scene, we see that Taryn bleeds on the temple grounds because of the wyvern's wing spur. So what if all of those blood sacrifices did indeed result in some connection to Dunne or help from Dunne in this circumstance? We also see in the scene that Violet also sends a prayer to Dunne as well as she's, fighting the wyvern and everything. Last but not least, we have only encountered high priestesses so far, but the excerpt indicates that there can be high priests as well. So, what if Berwyn was a high priest too?
Yes. remember how it's described that the sage, who we think is Berwin, in the dream has silver hair. Like Violet sees the wisp of silver hair. That's why I thought it was Theophanie. Who has silver hair and a connection to Dunne? A lot of fucking people. Violet, Theophanie, all the people in Umbriel, the temple attendants and the priestess here, they literally dye their hair. So, I mean, unless Berwin's just dyeing it as an aesthetic choice, kind of feels like that's a possibility. Maybe that's how he and Theophanie know each other. Maybe they were rivals in the temple and then transferred when they were venin. Maybe they were in love. I don't know. You can go a lot of ways with that.
Or, well, this is like throwing it way back to like, I think episodes 7 through 12 or something. But I was like, oh, what if Theophanie is Lyra as one of the first writers? And then
Was Berwin's Warwick?
Stand to reason that maybe Berwin was one of, yeah, maybe.
You know what? I'm not
I
going
don't
to
know.
say
I'd
no.
have to think more
What?
about that. So
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going to like soft pedal that. We're going to reel that back in. We're just going to do some thinking and thunking first.
Well, I did do a lot of thinking about the Theophanie and Lyra thing.
Well, that's true. Sorry.
I had
Yes.
quite a spiel
Not to
about
discredit that. Yeah.
But Berwin, I would have to do some more digging in relation to that. Anyways, we'll table that for our theories episode. So moving on. We pick up with Violet and Andarna in terror and shock while Rhee and Fierce take off after Theophanie's wyvern. And I gotta hand it to Rhee, because that's a bold as fuck move of her. Fortunately, Andarna is instructed to call Rhee and Fierce back because Theophanie is a maven. Taryn once again tells Violet to cut her power so as not to burn out, and right after that, Violet feels ice pierce through her shields like they aren't even there, and Xaden checks in with her. I am starting to wonder if there is something distinct about the venin and ice. The sage in Xaden's nightmare had icy invisible fingers, and ice is always associated with Xaden being more in his venin state. I don't know what it means, but it is something that I'm just kind of starting to notice a little bit more, so...
It does feel like that word choice is used frequently when describing the venin. It's possible it's just Rebecca's preferred descriptive choice, but it's also possible it's just magically relevant. So I'm a bookmark it.
Add it to the book. Second, I think Xaden's second signet is definitely growing stronger as well. He is able to break through Violet's shields, which seems to be a newer develop because we know she is capable of blocking Xaden out and has done so at various times throughout the book. We also see that Xaden breaks through Mira's shields as well in chapter 54 when he tells Violet he knows she won't tell anyone when she finds out he's venin because he's read her intentions. So next, Terrence's leg's injured, but thankfully he is okay. And both him and Violet are pissed to see that Andarna did not follow orders and instead stands in front of the steps of Dunne's temple, flanked by a half-dozen sword-brandishing attendants. It turns out that Andarna went to Dunne's temple because of what Aaric had said, and she states, "Princes do not make suggestions, and I am an extension of you." Based on her speculation that both Aaric, and then as an aside, my little idea that maybe Andarna has some precognitive abilities as well, I wonder if Andarna recognized Aaric's warning as an omen and knew there was a reason he'd said that, even if she also doesn't consciously know of her possible precognitive abilities.
I do think it's interesting that Andarna uses this as her justification because, to be frank, what the fuck does Andarna care what Aaric wants? Sure, he's a prince of Navarre, but dragons don't really care about all that. And it's not like Aaric used his status as a prince to order Violet to do it. Not to mention, if we're following rank best guy style, Violet actually outranks Aaric, so she definitely isn't taking orders from him in any capacity.
Yep.
So it did stick out to me that that was Andarna's justification. I felt like she was just like looking for a reason to justify her behavior. She was like, but he's a prince.
It's true. Fair enough. Right. So in addition, I definitely have to note that this temple for Dunne near Raisha has a 20-foot tall statue of the goddess, which looks almost exactly like the one in Umbriel. I don't have a better place to put my big god thought, so I am going to put it here. I think Aaric said that Dunne's temple needed to be protected to save Tyrrendor because there actually is some sort of greater connection between the province and the goddess Dunne. I've mentioned this before, but while there is no specific association in Norse language for Tyrrendor, there is one for Tyr, which means god or deity, and Tyr is also the Norse god of war, law, and justice. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Temple of Dunne, who is the goddess of war, needed to be guarded. Next, the word Aaricia is connected to the Greek word Arit, which signifies not just any form of goodness, but the highest form of excellence encompassing both moral and intellectual qualities. We see that Tyrrendor and its nobility, which bases out of Eurasia, has proven time and time again they are willing to fight for what is morally right. Fen did that with the rebellion, and now Xaden is following suit years later. We also can't forget that Lyra's excerpt from Chapter 7 said all who channel from dragon and griffin alike should flourish under the wards, and now Eurasia will be that haven should one of the others ever return, which we know that one of the others is referring to the Irids as the seventh breed needed to correctly raise the wards. In addition to that, Irid means rainbow, but in Greek mythology, it's connected to the Greek goddess Iris, who is the goddess of rainbows and served as a messenger of the gods. Rainbows in general symbolize a connection between heaven and earth. And we also know that Irids are magic and possess powers that supersede what the other dragons can do. AKA, maybe it's not that all dragons are necessarily connected to the gods, but Irids specifically seem to be. And knowing that, it would also explain why the Irids remain peaceful and choose not to intervene with matters of other beings. We also see that Darna, as an Irid, takes it upon herself to guard the temple, and then later on, Leothin arrives as well. As I stated like a couple episodes ago, I think, Leothin's name is closely related to Leothan, which is of Irish origin, derived from the Gaelic word meaning warrior or fighter. And how interesting that the Irids, typically known to be pacifists, are the ones showing up to help at Dune's temple. Finally, we can't forget that there have been so many references and connections between Xaden and Dune, or gods in general. I listed out several details in our episode covering chapters 25 through 28, but most notably, in Iron Flame, chapter 35, Violet looks at Xaden and notes, "I look up into the wrath of Dune in the form of gold-flexed onyx eyes." And there was also a pretty damning line in chapter 19 of Fourth Wing that said, "Xaden fills the doorway like some kind of dark avenging angel, the messenger of the Queen of Gods." And I was like, is that referencing Amari? We also made the connection between Xaden wearing double-crossed swords and Dune's emblem having that as well. And speaking of Dune's emblem, there were two types that we saw in Unreal, but the guards with the silver armor had an emblem that has two crossed swords gripped in the center by a claw. And Violet specifically thinks the emblem of Dune. What if the claw is meant to be a dragon claw? And with Irid, meaning messenger of gods, they actually are associated with Dune and possibly other gods as well, like Amari, with the whole under Amari sky, and the Irids are magic because they quite literally come from the sky where the gods reside. I yapped way too much, but now it's out there, and I will shut up now.
Lorraine, you deserve an award for that, truly. If there was an Onyx Storm award, I would give it to you. You didn't just research that, you investigated. You became an investigator.
Oh, I went very deep on this particular thing.
I want to see your search history so bad.
All about mythology and
right.
gods, Eurasia, Tyrrendor. I've even looked up Xaden and Lynx's name, which is kind of interesting as well. I'll leave it at that for now, but...
Meanwhile, mine is like fan art of Xaden, fan art of Riddick, fan art of Sawyer, fan art of Xaden and Violet, fan art of Tay. That's all mine is. And I'm like, oh shit, yeah, I need to do my notes. No, truly, that's really what my search history is. Okay, anyway. I love all of this. I think these are all incredible callouts and connection. We've discussed a few times how Rebecca Yarros is known to picking names of people, places, and dragons that mean something. Specifically, there are a lot of the dragons' names that really align with what their writers can do power-wise and their story arcs. I think everything you pointed out is too coincidental to not be connected. There's a lot to that. And, you know, we always joke, oh, Lorraine's always on her god shit. And you are. But there's a reason for that, right? The gods have become so heavily embedded in this story that we really can't ignore it. It is a core piece of Violet's journey. The whole dedication thing alone is indicative of that. You know, I roll my eyes at you. I'm like, oh God, not this again. But in the reality, there is significantly more to this. And I just don't think that can be understated.
Exactly.
Retweet.
The gods are coming into play. I am keeping a very close watch on all of this.
We know. Trust me, we know. I also love the moment when they are standing in front of the temple and Rhiannon says, "What was that all about? We could have caught them." Violet responds, "That was Theophanie I call back." And Reed throws her arms up. Rhiannon is such a badass. I want to be Rhiannon when I grow up. She didn't give a fuck. She's like, "Okay, it was Theophanie, and what was your point?" I said I could have caught her. That's what I meant. God, I love her so much.
I do too. She's excellent. Reed can do no wrong in my eyes.
She's excellent. She is the embodiment of excellence. Everything she does, she's the best friend. She's the coolest. Like, just love her.
Also, speaking of Ree and the gods, we cannot forget that in Fourth Wing, there was that one line.
Very first chapter.
That said, that Ree kind of
resembles Amari.
To Amari. And so,
yep.
I don't know. Maybe we have several characters that are favored or, I don't know, have been touched in some roundabout way by the gods. I don't know. Anyways, poor baby Andarna was just trying to be fierce and do the dragons and Violet proud. But I loved when Violet, feeling equally protective of her, tells her, "You always say that you chose me, but I stood in front of you on that threshing field and I would do it again." At this point, Ree turns with Fierge in a big moment we have for Ree. She reveals that she can now summon and retrieve giant wing spur-sized objects out of a dragon's leg. And I was like, whoa, yet another character whose power is expanding. And I love that Ree just casually says, "I practice."
Yeah, like, girl.
She's just all around the best, and I love her so much.
Yeah. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I love seeing the signets in use and learning about how they evolve. I honestly think it's my favorite part of the magical world building that Rebecca Yarros has done. It's just so cool.
While Taryn is going to be okay, the situation is not, as another group of 3 wyvern beeline straight for them, which could easily report that they'd infiltrated very close to Horatius Gates without being stopped by the wards. I thought it was kind of hilarious that in the middle of this very dire situation where Violet, is begging the temple priestess to at least go hide, the priestess asks, "Do you use lye and the juice of the manwasa flower on your hair as we do?" And I was like, "Ma'am, this is not the time for chats about hair." But aside from that, there were several notable things this priestess says. So first, it doesn't seem like this priestess has silver hair, though she does have the tattoo on her forehead. The priestess and all the other temple attendants at this oration temple for Dunne have white hair. Naturally, I had to ask why the priestess would ask Violet such a question, and this is what I concluded. We know from chapter 31's excerpt that in Navarre, parents were no longer allowed to dedicate their children to their favorite deity as of 200 AU. From then on, the decision would be left to individuals once they reached the age of majority. We also learned later that Asher specifically took Violet to Umbriel, where she was partially dedicated, though that process was not completed. I think that there is a difference in what full dedication looks like on the continent versus the Isles, because in chapter 30, when Violet sees Umbriel's temple attendants, she thinks every single one of them has silver hair, not gray, not white, silver. But we do see that the priestess in the Oration Temple for Dunne has the tattoo on her forehead, and so did the priestess in Umbriel. She just doesn't have the same silver hair. So that still indicates to me that there's something about dedication in Umbriel that causes the silver hair, I think.
Agreed. So do you think the priestess and the temple attendants in Eratia dye their hair silver as an homage to Dunne and the dedication practice?
Yes, I think that the priestess asking that indicates that that's probably what they do. And as you said, it's likely their way of honoring Dunne and the dedication practice, I would think. I mean, I don't know why else you would do something like that, right?
Right. Okay.
So next, the priestess says, either Dunne protects us or we meet Malik as her worthy servant. And when Violet responds, Dunne isn't going to appear and take up arms, she responds, of course not. She sent you. What an odd thing to say. I don't know exactly what this is meant to mean, but obviously my first thought is that this connects back to the fact that Violet has been partially dedicated or touched by Dunne. If it ain't that deep, then at bare minimum, the priestess believes Dunne is watching over them and has sent Violet in her stead.
I think it absolutely has to be related to Violet's special connection to Dunne. I think that's a totally fair conclusion to draw.
Next, as we have been long awaiting, Theophanie does indeed show herself yet again. Basically, Theophanie is asking Violet to come with her, as she has been, and she promises, I'll give you what you want most. The priestess intervenes and yells at Theophanie, "Heretic, you are not welcome here." And at this point, Violet realizes that Theophanie, quote, was a priestess of Dunne. Her silver hair matches the attendants on Umbriel, matches mine, gets cut off. And I was like screaming. First of all, the fact that Theophanie's silver hair matches the temple attendants in Umbriel and Violet's hair leads me to wonder, was Theophanie also dedicated in Umbriel, or was she dedicated prior to the ban of dedicating children in the 200s? Like, that's another piece of information I would want to know, is what was that process like in Navarre before they outlawed doing that to children?
Oh, yeah. That's a really good question. Theophany heavily alludes to the idea that venin are immortal, or if not immortal, they have extremely long lives that span over centuries. So it honestly really could be either. Also, this is an exciting revelation, but once again, I found myself a little underwhelmed and a little puzzled that it took Violet, who has the mind of a scribe, this long to put this together. We figured that out way back when they were in Umbriel. Like the moment we saw silver hair and tattoos, and she was like, "Oh, your dedication." And Violet's like, "Huh?" And like this theme comes up again later in the conversation with Mira and Brendan in chapter 54, 55.
Right.
And I'm just like, Violet, these are not huge logical leaps that we're making. Why are you surprised? I don't think you should be this surprised. I don't know. I'm sorry. It annoys me.
Well, again, she's never asking any questions. She just,
Yes.
she kind of does, like, in the moment, she'll be like, what did she say? But then she, like, never touches back on it again. As we've mentioned, this is supposed to be from Violet's POV. And so I don't understand why sometimes we don't get, like, little downloads of Violet thinking about information that she's learned so far or whatever it is, you know? So anyways, to get back to the whole Theophany as a heretic situation, a heretic in a religious context refers to someone who differs in opinion from the established religious dogma, aka Theophany must have done something that goes against the code of worshiping Dunne. And I was like, what could she have done? That was so unthinkable. Is this about her turning venin?
That would be my best guess. In general, going against the laws of nature and magic and corrupting your soul seems like things any god would disapprove of.
They don't like it.
They don't like it. You can't have more power than what the gods gift you.
But actually, I did wonder if it's a little bit deeper than that. The excerpt for this chapter to me indicates that there is some sort of power a high priest or priestess gets by being so close to the gods. We already kind of talked about this, but if that's the case, then in theory, Theophany already had power as a high priestess. And then if she turned venin as well to get more power, was that like the ultimate heretic action? And then it also leads me to ask, does Theophany possess both the power of a god and the power of channeling directly from the earth as a venin? Or did she, well, I guess now that I think about it, I'm sure Dunne probably shunned her for that, right? Maybe she doesn't have any power from the gods anymore. I don't know. I'm kind of confused. There's so many things. I feel like I talked about this when they were in Umbriel, and I was on my god shit, and I was like, well, the priestess said the touch of a god produces
creates such a longing.
And I was speculating, well, is she alluding to the fact that they do get some power? And then I was like, okay, well, that's confusing because now that introduces yet another form of magic or power that we would have to be on the lookout for, because we have riders, we have potentially a different situation going on with the Irids and their magic. Then we have runes as a magic system. And then now we're also going to have
Dreamwalking
god power potentially. And I'm like, there's just a lot going on.
It's a lot.
Theophany muses that perhaps she isn't welcome, but they are, referring to two venin who appear next.
I didn't know that they were both wearing red robes. Just in case in the future we learn that indicates something special or notable about the venin who wear them, because I don't think any other venin have been described as wearing red robes.
I don't think so either. But we've had purple robes, green robes, blue robes, now red robes. I think that's it so far, right?
I think.
Yeah, interesting. So things only get crazier when Andarna leaps into action and she blasts a stream of fire at Theophany. But Theophany does not burn. And I was like, why? How is this possible?
Damn it.
I brainstormed a couple ideas. Maybe Theophany's status as a maven venin somehow means that she has some ability or strength that prevents her from burning. Another idea, Theophanie could have another signet that counters like Bodhi's. Perhaps there was something about Theophanie being dedicated to Dunne in the past that afforded her extra power. Maybe Theophanie is carrying some sort of rune that protects her from fire. Or perhaps Taryn was right when he said that first fire burns the hottest, and that was the only reason why Indarna burned the venin the first time.
I'll also add to that maybe Indarna has to alter her fire in some way magically. As we know, it's been stated, Irids are magic. They're special. They have a special kind of magic. But maybe Indarna just doesn't know how to do it yet. And honestly, basically, she just got lucky that first time. Because, as it's been pointed out by Leothin, Indarna doesn't know their ways. She doesn't understand her truth, what power she holds. And so maybe a little bit it was derived out of the need to protect Violet. And so instinctively, she was able to burn that particular venin. Of course, you could argue she would want to protect Violet here, but I don't think that was a fluke. I don't think that was a first fire burns the hottest thing.
Okay. Yes. Okay, so actually, on the note that you just said about Indarna altering her fire in some way magically, back in Onyx Storm, the prologue, they're briefly discussing how Indarna burned the venin, and Indarna says, magic feels different when I change color. Maybe my use of power in that moment altered the venin and weakened her enough to blister. And just thinking about like what color she was in that case, in chapter 63 of Iron Flame, after Indarna burns the venin for the first time, Violet notes her scales are as black as Taryn's now. Maybe I'm just seeing things. So maybe that does indicate that there is some kind of change in Indarna's abilities or her magic depending on the color that she chooses to have. I don't know what color she was in this chapter. We know that Indarna typically likes to either have her scales be black to match Taryn's, or she'll like have like that purplish black tone. Those seem to be the two colors that she kind of prefers. But we didn't get a description of her color in this scene, I don't think. So, interesting though. We unfortunately get no answers because Theophanie looks to the sky at that moment and it says she backs away, her eyes widening, and then she runs toward approaching Darkwielders. The three of them grasp hands and it says the one in the center takes a single step and vanishes, just like Garrick. And again, I was like, what is going on? So in regards to the venin distance wielding, the way I read this, I took it to mean that it was one of the other two venin that approached, not Theophanie, that distance wielded. Because first of all, I feel like if it was Theophanie that apparated or distance wielded or whatever, Violet would have stated in the description that it was Theophanie, but she just says the one in the center. And if this is the case, then now I'm confused because Theophanie can apparate, like she did in chapter 2 when the venin tried to break Jack out. So why would a different venin need to take them? Why didn't she just leave on her own and leave the other two to like do whatever it is that they're going to do, you know?
Yeah. I had the exact same confusion and frustration here as well. But I think there were only ever 3 venin here in the scene, Theophanie and the 2 wearing red robes. I think it's reasonably safe to presume it's Theophanie who is distance building them out of there, but it is a very odd word choice. Like, why not just say Theophanie distance wields them out of there? Like, why say the one in the center? It's an odd word choice. I totally agree. But I'm like, I cannot dwell on this. I got to keep it moving, you know?
It's weird, though. We're
But it's
noting
weird.
it for sure.
No,
So,
it is.
In addition, the fact that a distance-wielding venin specifically exists means that Garrick must be the balance for this, right?
I would think so, yes. Although we have speculated that any venin of a maven rank can distance wield. So again, unclear of like how balance works. Can multiple people have a signet on either side? I don't know, but I would think so.
True.
That would mean, as we kind of talked about earlier, Theophanie and Berwin are both potentially balances for a lot of people.
I know, which at this point, I feel like we just have to wait to get some kind of confirmation or clarity about what they all can do. We know that they, generally speaking, have lesser magics, and then we learn that they also have signets specifically. But now it feels like it's getting to be like a question of how many signets can venin have, or like what is the total range of magical abilities they possess, especially as they get stronger in power and like rank up among the venin too. So
yeah, also Violet thinks, oh, just like Garrick. And that statement to me seems to imply that Garrick can in fact distance will people and take people with him. We were unclear on that when we first got introduced to Garrick's second signet because we really don't know anything about what he can do, how far he can go, how much energy and all that. We know that he can move himself and his dragon because that's how he shows up in chapter 7 through 12 to help Violet. But we don't know for sure. Like, we've talked about that. If he needed to get Violet out of there fast, could he grab her hand and like, let's go?
That's true. Violet hasn't seen Garrick do something like that yet, right? But
no,
that seems like the next progression for him to take.
I would think so, yeah.
Now, the other thing I want to address is this. What was Theophanie actually referring to that scared her off? We learned shortly after that the wards come back up, so it would make sense to think that this is what scared her off, but I don't actually feel like that's the case. I think Theophanie could maybe tell that Leothan was coming because she looks to the sky and her eyes widen. The venin know about the wards. That's nothing new for them. And I don't think that Theophanie would be afraid of them because the wards may take down the wyvern, but the venin will survive even if it makes it harder for them to channel magic. Theophanie has also demonstrated that she can apparate while she's inside the wards. So to me, I'm like, ain't no way it was the wards that scared her off.
No, those are good
then
points.
It makes me wonder if Leothan, specifically as an older, likely more skilled and powerful Irid, would have been able to do something to her magic and nullify it or something, because we know that Irids are magic. And so she in particular was like really freaked out to see Leothan.
These are all really excellent points. I think it's reasonable to say she could see or sense Leothan somehow, and that's what made her flee. Now, why she would specifically be scared of an adult and educated Irid, no idea. Maybe all Irids' fire can burn venin, but they had to do something magical in nature to it, as we discussed previously about Andarna. Andarna just demonstrated she doesn't know how to do it, so she's not scared of Andarna, but Theophanie was perhaps worried that Leothan would. And remember, Theophanie clearly has some deeper knowledge of Irids and what they're capable of, because she's the one who told Violet and Andarna that she was an Irid, right? And Theophanie has been around for hundreds of years. Maybe she was around during the First Great War. The thing is, we just don't know how old Theophanie is, right? And that would help put her on a timeline for us knowledge-wise, but I think she's scared of Leothan.
So I don't know what this means, but I also found it notable that Malik has been mentioned twice now in association with the scene at Dunne's temple. The priestess had said either Dunne protects us or we meet Malik as his worthy servants. And next, Violet in this instance thinks, what in Malik's name just frightened Theophanie so badly that she fled? And Malik also, he's been mentioned a fair amount in this book too, but he was mentioned a lot in like Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. Violet is frequently, like, I'm thinking about certain instances where she is telling Malik, you can't have him, or like she sends prayers to Malik. I don't know. As a god, he's been mentioned pretty frequently as well. So then I started wondering, are Dunne and Malik specifically connected somehow as well? Is there some sort of agreement between these gods? It would kind of make sense since in war, people die. So maybe they're working together. Just a thought. Theophanie and the other venin have left at this point, but the wyvern remain for now, and Violet prepares to wield against them. Violet sends up a prayer to Dunne before she wields a strike that hits one of the wyvern just as she feels magic wash over her. And then the wyverns start dropping like flies. This is equally as chaotic as everything else. And in my head, I just imagine the falling wyvern basically as meteors just hitting the ground. And they're like crashing and skidding into things and like sending chunks of rock everywhere. Chaos.
Yeah. Oh, and you have to imagine this is all happening in like 90 seconds or less. So it truly is absolute chaos and insanity.
Violet is about to get blasted to Malik by a chunk of rock when Zaddy saves the day by lassoing the rock to stop it with a band of shadow. Xaden, thankfully, has no trace of red in his eyes, but I did find it interesting that blood drips from the sword in his left hand. And he clarifies it isn't mine. And I was like, whose is it then? I know they're out there fighting venin and wyvern, but something about that line just stuck out to me. Also,
I just assumed
venin
it was,
don't bleed, right?
I think initiates and
early
ASIM
ones
do. Early ones do, yeah.
Right. But if they're higher, then they wouldn't.
They don't. They just desiccate. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It was just kind of weird. It was a weird line.
I didn't think it was weird at all. I'll be totally honest.
Oh, I did.
I also love the call back to the prologue in this scene. Xaden says to Violet, "And it is always you." If you remember from the very beginning of the book, when Venin infiltrate Basgiath to free Jack, and Xaden bursts into the room with his shadows and finishes off the venin, he says, "Tell me something, Violence. Why is it always you?" And he's right. It is always Violet.
Always.
Always.
So another thing that was a little bit confusing to me was Sigale's reaction. So did Sigale think Violet did something to Xaden because Xaden explained Sigale refused to hold her position once she felt the wound? But then Xaden just had the blood on the sword and his face isn't his. So what is he talking about?
I think the wound she's talking about is Terrence, and she's angry at Violet for not protecting Tarn. Right now, the specific battle is escaping me. It was either Ressin in Fourth Wing or Basgiath and Iron Flame. There's a moment where Violet is worrying about Xaden, and she's watching what's going on with him instead of watching the wyvern going for Tarn. And Sigale basically chomps a wyvern that was going to get Tarn, and she gives Violet this menacing look. And I remember Violet thinking, got it, message received. Sigale will keep Xaden safe, and it's my job to watch Tarn's back. So I think Sigale holds Violet responsible for Tarn's well-being. And that's why Tarn jumps in and is like, it's not her fault.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, okay, yes. Yes, that makes perfect sense. So we quickly learn that the wars were brought up, and then Leothin reveals himself, and it's described that darkness transforms, scales the color of night, ripple into a shade that's not quite black or purple, which actually seems similar to one of the colors that Darna likes to be in. So then the chapter ends with Leothin stating it seemed necessary to fire your ward stone.
Hashtag thanks, Leothin. Thank you for that. But now I hate you for what you're about to do. No, not thank the Irids. No.
All right, so that ends chapter 52. Moving on to chapter 53, the excerpt. This one was from Lilith's journal, and it says that Asher returned on this day, and she hopes no one finds out what he did. She states, "I'm not sure I'll ever forgive him for what he's done to her." First of all, Lilith was a captain at this time, and we learned from Mira later that Asher and Lilith left them with Grandma Niara when Mira was 8, while they took Violet to Umbriel. According to Google, Mira was born in 607 AU, so by the time she was 8, it would have been 615 AU. I'm going to assume that Asher's research on Umbriel occurred during the secret trip where he started the dedication process for Violet, so that means he and Lilith went to Umbriel in 615 AU, I think, and Violet would have been 2 at that time. The thing that I am confused about is why Lilith writes in the journal that she doesn't know if she can forgive Asher, but according to Mira, both of them left for the trip because that's why Mira and Brennan got left behind with Grandma Niara. So what was she doing on this trip? I'm a little suspicious of how truthful Lilith is in this journal about this fact because I don't know, I just don't necessarily believe that Lilith and Asher would do anything that the other didn't know about.
I don't know. I actually really do not think Lilith knew what Asher was doing or was involved in this in any way. I agree with you. It is confirmed by Mira that Asher and Lilith went to Umbriel or wherever else together, but it would have been pretty easy for Asher to just grab Violet and nope out of there for a while. I mean, I don't know how long it takes, but if Lilith didn't know where they were, she maybe couldn't have stopped them. My impression based on this excerpt and what we learn later is that Asher did it without Lilith's consent. I don't know why, but my gut just tells me that she didn't know.
Interesting. So anyways, celebrations are in order now that Aurecia's wardstone has been properly fired, but not for long because what a freaking heartbreaking chapter.
I do have an overarching thought, and here it is. And Darna, no, don't go. Day. That's my overarching thought. That's all I could think. No, don't go in, Darna.
Baby, please don't go.
I hate this chapter.
If I wake up tomorrow, will you still be here?
I don't know this song.
What's his name? I think it's Mike Posner.
Mike Posner?
Posner. Yeah, I think that's who it is.
That sounds familiar. I can't immediately recall who that is.
I feel like you've probably heard this song before. Maybe when I was in high school or something like that. I don't know. Anyways, it doesn't matter.
If it was mainstream, it was not for me, okay? I like to find people that were good before they were big. No, just kidding. Not really.
Oh.
I was a mainstream bitch, okay?
Oh, I absolutely was. I
Oh,
love all the
yeah,
pop
yeah.
shit. It's
Exactly, yeah.
significant.
Still do.
All right. Xaden makes his exit considering the last meeting with the Irids, and Violet quickly fills Rian on the Irids' pacifist nature before everyone gets slide whistled into the communication circle. Theophane once again points out how dangerous Violet is, and he says to Andarna, "Your human is as dangerous as we feared," which he also knows because once again, he was watching without anyone knowing. The cherry on top of that is that he is also still just as judgmental of everyone's behavior. So, given my god speculations from earlier, though, I wonder if Leothan is referring to Violet's dreamwalking, or if he somehow knows Violet's been touched by Dunne as well, and therefore knows she has some extra power, possibly. Aside from that, if Leothan was watching and knew to go fire the wardstone, then it's entirely possible that Theophanie sensed him somehow as well, because he's like been in and around for quite a while, you know?
Yeah, it seems like he's been observing them for an extended period of time. During the scene, Sigale jumps in to defend Andarna and says, "She is a credit to our riot, as we hoped she would be." So first and foremost, I love that Mama Sigale is like, "Oh no, you didn't talk about my baby that way." I know that Taryn and Sigale are not Andarna's parents, but I really think of them as like her adoptive parents. And so I just love those moments. I'm like, Andarna's found family. Leothan then responds, "Yet in none of the ways we value." And I about had a fit. I was like, yeah, no shit. Perhaps it's because you abandoned her for over 600 years and left her to be raised by the Empyrean. Guys who have been listening for a while know this conversation makes me fucking heated. And if you would like to relive my rant about this very sentiment, go back and listen to chapters 38 through 43. But, I mean, this is exactly the nexus of my argument. She's nothing like what an Irid is supposed to be because she was not raised by Irids, and that is the Irid's fault. And so I hate that holier than thou. You're not like us. Well, why would she be? I still don't like the Irids. Even though they fired the wardstone, I still don't like them. And I feel like Leothan only did it so Andarna would go with them. It felt like a calculated thing, right? He used it as a way to, I guess, sort of manipulate Darn. Like, "Oh, your human will be fine. I fired their wordstone. Let's go." And I don't like that. Well, when he like quite literally says, "I didn't do it for you."
I'm a little bit annoyed that we were set up to think we were going to get more information about the Irids, and like we learned basically nothing, because that would be really helpful in terms of understanding their motivations and why they behave the way that they do. So, anyways, I loved that Violet steps in to defend Andarna and says you set her up for what you consider failure when you left here to be raised in the ways of the Empyrean. And thank you. That's what we've been saying.
Yup.
Leothan concedes that Andarna's motives were honorable, but the actions were still abhorrent. But then he reveals that though separated by many generations, Andarna and Leothan share the same bloodline and are of the same den. So this definitely explains the similar swirl patterns on the horns and Leothan's willingness to at least hear them out when we first meet the Irids. And now he fires the wardstone. I suspected Leothan may actually be a pretty powerful Irid, and given what we've seen from Andarna already, now knowing she is from the same den as Leothan, I wonder what this means for Andarna's power further along in the story as well.
It seems like the Irids have distinct dens within their breed of dragon, and I wonder if each den has a leader similar in the way the other 6 breeds of dragons do. That makes me wonder if Leothan and the other Irids we met back in chapter 42 are the respective leaders of each of their dens within the Irids.
Ooh, yeah.
Because I feel like
they got their own little Irid.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much, because they watched Andarna and all of them for a while before they approached them. And I would imagine they would want to send powerful and or distinct representatives for the Irids. They're not just going to send nobodies. And so I think within the Irids, they're important in some way.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense, I think. Leothan then forces everyone else out besides Andarna and Violet for the next part of the conversation. Notably, Leothan blocks Violet's bond to Terran with a stronger shield that's, quote, oddly similar to the effects of the serum they dosed us with during RSC. And I was like, that is definitely not mentioned for nothing. Is it possible that serum was created using the Irids somehow? I don't know how they would access an Irid unless perhaps they somehow got an eggshell or something, but the only one we know of was Andarna's, and Violet gave that to King Cortland and Deborelli. But we also know the serum has been used on Jack to block his access to magic, right?
Correct.
I also do think it's important to note that the shield Leothan uses doesn't sever Violet's bond. It just blocks it. So Terrence and Gale and Fierce depart, and Leothan continues on with his conversation. He insists that Darna come back to the Irids' home with him, stating she should be given the chance to learn their ways, to choose their ways. And he hopes that after a few years, he says, you will have learned enough to know your truth. Once again, I find the use of the word choose interesting because it immediately makes me think of how the priestess in Umbriel told Violet it is not too late to choose her, referring to Dune. Jack has also said, we just have to choose to see it, to bypass the gatekeepers and take what's rightfully ours. Theophanie has been telling Violet to choose her as her teacher. And of course, we have the dragons telling the writers they choose them. It's used a lot in many different contexts. And I was like, is this all just a thematic commentary on choice and fate and outcomes? Or I don't know.
I think that's an interesting parallel to draw. It seems like both Darna and Violet's paths are not set and they can both still quote unquote choose. So I am interested to see, I guess, what choices they make and what that means for their quote unquote paths.
Also, obviously, I want to know what truth there is to learn about the Irids. Is this about the venin or what happened between the Irids and the other dragons, perhaps?
I thought it was interesting that he says your truth, not the truth, but your. I wonder if this is like a rite of passage thing that every adolescent Irid has to go through. And knowing your quote-unquote truth is representative of some level of knowledge and maturity. It kind of sounds like a cultural thing or a rite of passage that maybe it's indicative about self-awareness or your place in the hierarchical structure of dragons. I don't know, but that's what it kind of sounded like to me.
Oh, maybe it has to do with why Darna was the criterion.
Like possibly, yeah. Like why she was selected. Maybe her parents were notable. I mean, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So Leothan insists there's nothing here for Darna but war and suffering. And when Darna argues she's bonded and that our lives are mine, the very energy that forms us is intertwined, then Leothan states, so end it. Bonds are yearly magical ties. You are Irid. You are magic. Bend it, shape it, break it as you see fit. So Irids can indeed basically do whatever they want with a magical bond or a connection. But my main question with this is, does this apply to any magical bond? Like bonds between dragons or bonds that venin have with magic or with each other? Like in theory, could an Irid break a venin's connection to magic permanently or block them from accessing it as well?
Ooh, I don't know. And I know we probably aren't going to get any more answers in this book, but I am obsessed over what Irids have the power to do and the magical implications of that power. And I really want to know. So my hope is that Darna goes off for a while. She learns all the important shit and she comes back and she's like, Violet, you're my truth. And let me tell you everything I fucking learned. That's my dream.
Gosh, I hope so. I'm really curious about all the different things that they can do. But everyone is shocked by this point. But Leothan goes on to reveal that Darna forged a new bond with Violet without realizing because Tarn spoke to Violet first and formed the first bond. And humans should only be able to have one bond with a dragon, and yet Darna forged a second one. So first of all, based off of this conversation, they make it seem like the first time a dragon speaks to a human for regular dragons establishes a bond. Is that how you read that too?
That would be the logical conclusion to me, yes.
Okay. Second of all, what do we think of the assessment that Tarn bonded first, not Darna? I actually feel like Darna may not have spoken to Violet first, but she had been taking note of Violet from the very beginning. Darna showed up at presentation, and Violet was drawn to her and compelled to help her during threshing. And actually, what's notable about that scene during threshing is that Violet looks north to go find Darna. Like she's up on the tree, she looks north, she's drawn to Darna very specifically. And I feel like that's kind of interesting. We also know that for whatever reason, Darna waited to hatch specifically for Violet. And I just can't help but think that there is some sort of magical reason for all of this. Maybe Darna did actually bond first, but then altered the bond to make room for Tarn.
I think it's possible, but honestly, I'm not really sure it matters either way. It doesn't change the fact that Darna is magic and can alter a bond in a way that other dragons can't. So I think you have good evidence to support it, but ultimately the implications are still the same. And Darna can alter bonds, and no other dragons can do that other than Irids.
That's true, but I guess Leothan has asked who bonded first, presumably to make a point. But then Theophanie had also asked who bonded first. So I find that to be kind of interesting too. And I wonder if maybe there is something specific about bonding first. I don't know. We don't get enough information about it to say anything conclusively. But Leothan also states that Tered's bond will keep Violet alive, and Indarna can always reforge the bond should she choose to return. And choose to return is basically exactly the same as what Lyra said in her journal in Chapter 7's excerpt. Again, I would love to know if Irids have bonded in the past, or if they fired the ward stone without bonding anyone, as Leothan did in this set of chapters. So this was also the one thing that gave me hope. I think Indarna's gonna come back at some point. I don't know when, but she will come back.
Oh, I will not accept a world where Indarna does not come back. I'm gonna think of this like a little family vacation for Indarna. That's all, nothing more. And she'll be back shortly. I don't know when, but shortly.
Indarna struggles to decide what to do, and Violet is understandably torn to bits over this as well. But reading this whole scene, I was definitely crying. When Violet tells Indarna, "I love you and I want you to feel complete. I want you happy and safe and thriving. I want you to live, even if it's not with me." And then it says immediately that yearning from Indarna floods the bond. And it says so deep it aches within my own chest.
Oh, yeah. The tears were flowing in this chapter. I just really have to commend Rebecca Yarros. The writing is magnificent. The pacing, the cadence, the word choice, you really just feel the despair and the longing and the love. And it's just devastating.
Leothan takes that as the decision being made, and Violet hears a shrieking whistle sound in her head that is followed by silence, and when she reaches for her bond with Indarna, she finds only a wall, then nothing.
No, Indarna!
I did take note of Indarna whipping her head toward Leothan as confirmation that it was Leothan that did something to the bond between Violet and Indarna. I point that out because I don't know how crazy this sounds, but I don't actually think that the bond is totally gone. In fact, we learned from Chapter 49's excerpt that only 2 gods require a lifetime dedication, Dunne and Loyal, for both war and love change souls irrevocably. Violet literally tells Indarna she loves her, and we know Indarna loves Violet so much as well. And even Asher pointed out that first love is irreplaceable, and the passcode to his journal was Aimser's name because Aimser was Lilith's first love. He recognized that a dragon is a writer's first true love. As I pointed out earlier, Indarna has just known that she was meant to bond Violet for whatever reason, and we see that Violet defended Indarna during threshing without knowing that she would bond to her. I strongly believe that love between them has changed something about their bond, or maybe love in itself creates its own bond. And Darna flooded the bond with this very intense yearning just before Leothan does whatever he does to their bond. And I think perhaps that was Indarna inadvertently tethering herself to Violet in some way in that moment.
I'm going to hold on to this hope for dear life because I need this to be true. This will sustain me until the next book comes out. So thank you for that.
Unfortunately, Leothan takes off, and shortly after, Indarna follows, leaving Violet grief-stricken and shocked by the loss of Indarna while everyone comes back. It was ugly tears by this point. I was crying. I do believe Indarna is going to come back. It seems like this is going to be maybe a book 4, possibly not even until book 5 type of situation. But in either case, that did not stop me from feeling so bad for Violet. And Indarna, the line that said, "There's no air and no reason to seek it. I was infinite, yet moored, and now I'm hollow and adrift in waters too vast to comprehend."
I told you the writing is good. It's devastating, but it's good.
And then on top of that, Taryn comes in and he sends strength down the bond and insists that Violet will breathe. But I gotta say, I was a little stunned when Violet immediately feels anchored from Xaden's presence on the bond, not Taryn's. And she thinks, I exist for Taryn, but I live for Xaden.
Ooh, yeah, I didn't like that either. I was like, how dare you?
Yes, I feel like that's kind of a slap in the face to Taryn.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah.
Your dragon fuels your power and has made countless accommodations for you and knows you so deeply from the bond that you have with him, and yet you're like, I live for Xaden. And I was like, what is Taryn to you? Fucking chopped liver? Okay.
Thank you. I will say she does have a quote later. I think it's in my favorite quotes that does redeem herself a little bit. And then like later when she's in the valley and she's like being close to Taryn makes me feel better. I was kind of like, okay, but yeah, I didn't like that either. I was like, that's rude, Violet. However, it is interesting to think about how intensely Violet feels given what we just discussed with the whole first love is irreplaceable. I feel like for basically everyone else, they choose their dragons above all else, even their life partners, but not Violet. I feel this gives some weight to our sort of fated mates theory, like there's something unique about Violet and Xaden's love for each other, especially when you refer back to the excerpt that says love and war change the soul irrevocably. I know we hinted at perhaps Xaden has some connection to Loyal, the god of love, or goddess. I can't remember if it's a god or goddess. But either way, I do feel that their relationship is far and above what I would call like quote unquote normal people in love. So I feel like that line kind of supports that.
Violet is very heartbroken at the loss of Andarna, and the chapter closes with her whispering to Ree, she's gone. Andarna's gone. And I was like, that's a no chapter.
Dude. I love Rebecca Yarros, okay? You guys know that. But I do not like her right now. She ain't my friend. She's hurt me so bad. First with Liam dying, then Lilith, then Xaden turning venin, and now this. And I gotta ask myself, what the fuck is wrong with me that I keep subjecting myself to this emotional torture? And then in the same breath, I'm like, I can't wait for book 4, guys. Why am I like this? I like to be heard, I guess. I don't know.
So that ends chapter 53. Moving on to chapter 54. The excerpt. This is from Colonel Kaori's Field Guide to Dragonkind, and it simply states no writer has ever survived the loss of their dragons. I can't imagine wanting to. I honestly don't really know if we can trust Kaori's information anymore. Violet even mentions that Jack survived the loss of Bade, but we also know he was venin. I mean, that's probably why. However, now we see that Violet has survived the loss of Andarna, quote unquote, but she's stricken with overwhelming grief as a result of this. I have to caveat, however, that, as we talked about earlier, I do not believe Andarna's bond was truly lost, but also if Kaori's excerpt is true, then that could indicate that Andarna is not actually gone. So,
oh, that's totally true. Yeah. I will say, for once, I am actually going to trust Kaori on this. Seeing how absolutely devastated Violet is, it really shows what it would be like for a writer to lose their dragon. Leothan even says Violet will survive because of her bond with Taryn. Also, you have to remember what is most arguably the most recognizable line from this book. A dragon without its rider is a tragedy. A rider without its dragon is dead. And so I think all those things combined seem to indicate this is probably pretty accurate. And it's really just because of Violet's bond with Darren. That's why she's still kicking.
Violet spends the next 3 days bedridden with the loss she feels without Andarna, and my heart was truly breaking for her. I loved that Taryn leaves his bond completely open and gives Violet unfettered access to him in a way she's never had. Oh, Daddy Taryn.
I know.
It's actually so cute to see Taryn be so comforting because we're primarily used to just seeing him be wise and strong and be the curmudgeon and all that. So
I was going to say wise and strong. I feel like strong, obnoxious, and rude. That's what we're used to seeing Taryn be. This is especially sweet when you realize that Taryn has to be feeling emotionally devastated by this too. He was also uniquely bonded to Andarna, and losing her has to be really painful for him too. I also think, as I kind of mentioned earlier, Taryn and Sorrengail see themselves as Andarna's parents. And so he's, in a way, mourning the loss of a child. To see him staying strong for Violet, it just like makes me want to tear up right now thinking about it. Taryn.
I also did note that Violet sleeps, but she doesn't dream. And we know her access to her Dreamwalking signet was through Andarna's power. I realize this contradicts my theory that I think there is still some sort of connection between Violet and Andarna, but who knows? I'm confused now, and I don't have the brain capacity to think this. So,
to me, logic would dictate since she and Andarna are no longer bonded, then she wouldn't have access to her power. which means no more dreamwalking. But something tells me that Rebecca Yarros did not build that reveal up for 2 books to then immediately take it away. So I'm going to want an explanation for that if that's true.
By the 4th day, Mira arrives in Arisha having been sent a missive from Brennan regarding Violet's current state. And she sure gives some literal tough love and manages to get Violet speaking and out of bed. Hooray! Honestly, this was like such a Mira quote that I loved. She says, "You can cry or scream or even break shit if you want, but you cannot live in this bed. I'm so sorry, but not sorry enough to lose you to your grief." I also found it notable that Mira asks point blank, "How did you replace the power you lost?" Which we see later is because Mira has been nervous since her combo with Grandma Niara and the priestess that Violet would turn venin.
On my first read, I was so confused by that question. I was like, what's wrong with you, Mira? Who cares about that? But then later I was like, oh, okay. She also touches on this later when she says the deficit of power has to be staggering, let alone the emotional impact of severing a bond. Again, really fixated on the loss of power in this situation. Given what we are about to learn, that makes sense. But I was just like, Violet is heartbroken. She doesn't care about Indarna's power. And I was like, oh, okay.
We also get a little bit of insight into the state of Arisha from Brennan now that the wards were properly raised. Mira asks him what he's been doing, and he says figuring out how to house and feed the thousands of people currently climbing the Madara Pass while overseeing a massive increase in forge output, in addition to spending my evenings mending every wounded rider capable of flying here from the front. So this information shocks Violet because it turns out that Xaden ignored Navarre's threats and opened Tyrandor's borders anyway. Yay, Duke Sadie! But also, no bueno, because this is considered treason. We also learn in chapter 46 that Melgren ordered Teladium output to be doubled, and Tyrandor is the source of this resource. So I can imagine that Tyrandor is under a lot of pressure and strain, navigating all of the things that are going on at this time.
I do love when Rebecca Yarros throws in realistic challenges of war other than battles and death. In reality, a lot of wars historically are partially determined by things like weather conditions, ammunitions and weapons distribution, supply chains of food, disease, all of those things. I think she does a good job of playing that up, but also like politically speaking, because that is also
right.
What will really impact the outcome of the war is literally the political relations and the nuances of that. So I like all that.
I agree. Violet finally gets out of bed to go bathe with Xaden's help, which I thought was a very sweet moment between them.
This has to be one of my favorite moments in the book so far. There is something so loving and tender and intimate about this, and I just love how Xaden knows exactly what Violet needs and takes care of her. As Xaden washes her hair, Violet says, "I think I know why riders die when their dragons do. It's not just a deficit of power. In that moment, I didn't know who I was, where I belonged, or why I should bother breathing. If Taryn hadn't grounded me, I think I would have willingly floated away. I still can't comprehend the enormity of her absence. I don't know if I ever will. I can't see past it." And I wanted to read this whole quote because, first of all, absolutely devastating. The other reason is that this has finally helped me piece together how Jack could survive the loss of his bond with Bade. The first element is the loss of power. When you're a venin, you have access to power, so even though you lose the power of your dragon, it's easily replaced, so you don't suffer the physical blow from the loss of power. The second element is the crippling emotional loss, but we learn from Xaden that the real danger of being venin is the ability to basically turn off your emotions and not feel all the pain and hurt of being human. Hence why Violet is always telling Xaden to stay off the ice. I think that Jack was able to survive the loss of Bade because he was able to turn off his emotions and therefore didn't feel the emotional devastation of the loss of Bade. And so all of these things together kind of helped me click those pieces into place.
Well, that's a really good point. I don't think I realized how truly emotionally the process was until we get Violet's experience with it, because we haven't experienced it from a reader's perspective yet. So it's a great point. While I think this description is fitting for the grief Violet feels, I did find the specific wording of how without Taryn grounding her, aka giving her power from the ground, Violet would have floated away into the sky, perhaps? I feel like this is another double meaning line, considering our theory about the magic of the Irids ultimately being the power of the sky. Could be nothing, but they also discuss the loss of Indarna, and this is when Xaden mentions that no rider has survived what you just did, and Violet responds, except Jack Barlow. Violet has not turned venin, and she has been emotionally wrecked by this, but she is indeed still alive. Leothan did state that Terran's bond would keep Violet alive, but I don't know. Ultimately, as I've been alluding to, I'm just kind of on the fence about whether Indarna's bond is actually gone. Call me a hopeless optimist, but I'm going to stay Delulu and my hope over here. So. The next sequence is where I feel the events got real juicy. So Xaden asks who Niara is, and upon leaving the bathroom, Violet hears Brennan and Mira arguing about her visit to Grandma Niara and whether or not their parents actually took Violet to be dedicated. I'm going to list out everything we learn and then provide some thoughts after. I found it really interesting that Mira says there are months missing from Lilith's journal, and this overlaps with the time period Lilith and Asher left Mira and Brennan with Grandma Niara, but they took Violet with them. And then when their parents returned, Grandma Niara stopped talking to their parents. In addition, Mira tells them that the priestess, who I'm assuming this is the priestess in Umbriel, told the parents that they couldn't finish Violet's dedication process because they only accepted children whose futures are certain, and Violet still had paths to choose from. And one of those paths, it kind of trails off, and then she continues. The priestess spoke all cryptically, but basically said if Violet chose her future poorly, she could still earn their mentorship, but she'd turn. Then she gets cut off by Brennan. Violet steps in to confirm that she must have been dedicated in Umbriel, and guesses Mira was going to say that she'd turn venin. Brennan does not believe this and adds parents used to dedicate their infants to a particular deity service when they thought the touch of a god would help that child. Violet speculates that it was just Asher that took Violet to be dedicated because of Lilith's words from chapter 53's excerpt that said, "I'm not sure I'll forgive him for what he's done to her." Mira was also afraid Violet would turn venin because the priestess had said the heart that beat for Violet or within Violet would do the wrong thing for the right reason, reach for unspeakable power and turn dark. At this point, Xaden steps in and reveals to Mira that he is the heart that beats for Violet and reached for the unspeakable power, aka he turned venin.
Woo!
Wow. What a reveal of information. Here are the thoughts about all of this now. So Grandma Niara did not approve of dedication, well, I'm assuming, and this turns out to be the reason that she stopped talking to Violet's parents. As I stated earlier, I'm still not sure if I believe that Lilith didn't know. I almost wonder if she intentionally wrote chapter 53's excerpt in her journal so that if anyone in leadership did read her journals or suspect anything, she would have some deniability.
I still stand by my belief that Lilith really didn't know he planned to do that. Based on everyone's extreme reaction of horror at the thought of Violet being dedicated, it seems that the disdain for this religious practice was deeply embedded in their culture. And also add to that Brennan says Mom was never temple-minded. All of that points to the idea that Lilith didn't seem to know, plus the excerpt. I know you feel a little differently. I really don't think she did.
I need more information from Lilith as well, because we also know she got that. I forget who wrote it to her, but Lilith was in the know about finding a cure for the venin and stuff like that too, right? There was like that one excerpt that was like,
there is no cure, there's only control.
Right. And so, I don't know. Lilith clearly also knew a lot more than she was letting on. Something's weird to me because both, even in Asher's excerpts too, Asher will be like, your mother and I trust no one, yada, yada. So it seems to me like they were really close. And so it just feels weird to me that Asher would go and do something that was such a big deal without telling Lilith.
When it comes to children, if he really truly thought that is what would be best for Violet to keep her safe and protect her, parents do things for their children, even if it's against their partner. Something about the love of a child can drive you to do things that you didn't think you would do.
Do you have some secrets you'd like to share?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, my secret is my youngest daughter, she stays home with me, and our secret is she'll be like, Mommy, can I have a cookie? And I won't tell Daddy. And I'm like, girl, no. That's about as secret as we can. We'll go in the kitchen and eat some Oreos or something, and we won't tell Daddy.
So, along the Lilith note, though, while this isn't explicitly confirmed, it does tie back into the question of why was Violet born so pale and fragile to the point that their parents believed she needed help from the gods? Again, what actually was the fever, quote unquote, that Lilith had while pregnant with Violet?
Yeah, I was hopeful we would find out more about that in this book, and no, I don't think it's going to happen. After Brennan says that doesn't mean they hauled her to Dune's temple and dedicated her, that's been illegal since the 200s, it's described dedicated. Gravity pitches and my balance shifts like the stone beneath my feet has suddenly become sand. Then Violet pieces together what the priestess said in Umbriel. This has started to become a growing trend for Violet. And I know I talked about this all fucking episode. This is where the note actually was, and I should have put it way, way at the top. She completely misses the obvious logical conclusion. Hell, in this example, she didn't even need to make a logical leap. The priestess just straight up fucking told her they tried to dedicate her. I'm confused why Violet is completely caught off guard by this. She's like, oh my god, now it makes sense what the priestess said. Dude, the priestess literally said, we didn't complete your dedication. That was verbatim the words that came out of her mouth. And so, oh my God, for being the most intelligent and insightful of their generation, she is missing so much shit. And it just feels like such a huge departure from the Violet we know in Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. And honestly, a little bit feels like character assassination for me. And I don't want to hear that. Remember, she's just so in love with Xaden and she'll cede logic to love. I do get that. That makes sense in regards to her choices towards Xaden or about Xaden. She doesn't tell anyone. She keeps a secret, right? But it doesn't explain why Violet is getting these really important pieces of information. She's like, meh, I know Taryn always like, focus now, think later. And that's fine. Like in that specific moment, sure. But immediately after, maybe you should be like, what the fuck was that about? You know, I've been revived with my rage.
Another example of Violet not putting the pieces together despite her scribe mind. And I'm like,
it's crazy.
Maybe Asher did not teach you well enough.
Apparently not. Damn.
Anyways, I've already given my thoughts that I think the touch of a god is code for granting some sort of power from the gods, but obviously I would just love more information on what a touch from the gods actually means. I'm also a little confused by what the phrase, if Violet chose her future poorly, she could still earn their mentorship, but she'd turn. Because is this implying that even after the heart that beat for her turned venin, Violet can still complete her dedication? It seems like this would not be the case because the priestess in Erasia called Theophanie a heretic, and feeling pretty certain that that is because she turned venin. I don't know. That's kind of unclear to me. I would also love to know what all the paths they see for Violet are. What does it explicitly mean to have a certain path or future? What outcomes are they expecting? I also definitely feel like the high priestesses or high priests do have a little bit of oracle or prophetic abilities, because why would you be saying all that unless, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that sort of speaks to what I mentioned earlier. The power that a priest or priestess gets is this connection to the god, and they sort of dictate the practices at the temple. The high priestess can see a child's paths and decide if they're a good fit to be dedicated to Dune or whatever.
Also, when Mira is arguing about how she couldn't find records in the bar of Violet's dedication, she suggests maybe their parents did it in Peromil. Does this mean that Peromil still has a dedication practice within their temples?
I don't think so. I guess it's possible they still have them, or they outlawed it much, much later than Navarre, but I don't think so.
Okay.
Violet then asks Mira if this is why she's been so distant and constantly looking her all crazy all the time, and Mira basically says yes. This explains why when they were in Deverelli and Umbriel, anytime there was lightning, she would freak out and ask her if she wielded it. And Violet was always like, no, stop asking me that. There's no magic here. Why do I have to keep reminding you of that? And it's because of this information that Mira has. She's afraid that Violet has turned. So now that piece is like finally slid into place for me. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it.
So my last note, for whatever reason, this made me think of Lilith's excerpt from chapter 24 when she writes, she won't understand why you've kept her in the dark. Now we can only hope the bond between our daughters is strong enough to endure the paths they've chosen. They'll need each other to survive. Now that we are really picking apart the use of the words bond and chosen paths, it really makes me wonder what Lilith is talking about. Was this some foreshadowing for the fact that there would be some tension forming between Violet and Mira. As we've seen with Mira learning, Violet kept a huge secret from her.
Oh, that's a good call out. That's interesting. I would have to think about it some more, but I think when we first read that excerpt, we're supposed to think, oh, she's talking about the secret of the venin, the secret that Lilith basically died for. But now I'm like, maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's a lot of things. It seems like Lilith and Asher had a lot of secrets.
Yeah, lots of them. So to get back to the events of the chapter, Mira is understandably pissed to learn that Xaden has been venined since December, and even more upset to learn that Brennan knew. And she warns, he'll kill you. It's what they do. Good luck keeping her alive before she storms out of the room. I would like to note that Xaden mentally tells Violet Mira didn't intend to tell anyone about him, and Violet once again asked, he cut through her shields? This is the second time Violet has wondered about Xaden breaking through a shield. And yeah, at this point, Xaden's intrinsic power and overall power has definitely grown.
Although it has yet to be confirmed officially, this is totally canon for me. He absolutely can or is developing the ability to do so with consistency. It's just been mentioned too many times. There's too many little breadcrumbs of his intrinsic power expanding.
So that ends chapter 54. Moving on to chapter 55. The excerpt. This was from a text called On Tyranish History, a complete accounting, 3rd edition by Captain Fitzgibbons. It basically confirms everything we've speculated about the importance of Tyrandor by stating they provide the most conscripts and also provide Teladium for the rest of the kingdom. Without Tyrandor's supply of this resource, it would doom Navarre. It feels very great to have been on the mark with this, but truly, Navarre has no business threatening Tyrandor or making any move against them because Navarre needs Tyrandor more than Tyrandor needs Navarre, especially now that Erasia's Wardstone has been properly fired.
Oh, hell yeah. The only thing I'll add is, Lorraine, you were 100% spot on with this, and you deserve a sweet treat.
Sweet treats! So over the next 2 days, things get much more dicey politically within the kingdom, with Haldan stationing troops along the Kaldir border with Tyrandor, which then causes Xaden to cut off shipments of Teladium until King Tari confirms, quote, their alliance stands without the provincial commitment and the Retian right is safe at Biscayath. This is all so dumb. Like, none of y'all have any extra resources or time to waste because did you forget that the venin are right there waiting to drain everything and everybody? Obviously, I'm on Tyrandor's side because it's the right thing to do, but maybe everybody should be spending their time figuring out how to defeat the venin instead of arguing with each other.
Yep. So dumb. I think the words really give them a false sense of security. And so I think, honestly, that's why they lack a little urgency. But as Llewellyn points out, it doesn't take much to destroy the wards. Like, clearly the venin know how to do it. So they're idiots.
Retweet. So our next scene is spent in a runes class with Professor Trissa, where Violet is still struggling and is apparently worse than ever. I found it interesting that Violet notes she typically used Andarna's more delicate threads of magic for runes, but now she has to use Terran's power, which she describes as unruly and hard to separate, since Terran doesn't do anything in half measures, and neither does his power.
Honestly, though, when I read that, it makes perfect sense that there would be those distinct differences in Andarna and Terran's power. It tracks with their personality, level of skill, and all of that.
Once again, I still feel like something is going to go down in Drathis because Violet knows every day the line retreats closer to Drathis, and the atmosphere around here feels like the air before a thunderstorm, charged with inevitable violence. And I was like, that's not ominous at all.
Well, especially when she says the air before a thunderstorm, because when you say thunderstorm, I hear Theophanie.
No, yeah, quite literally. We also learned that Corden is not doing any better and has now been completely blocked off, leaving the seas as the only option for entrance without running into the venin. I also found it notable that while everyone practices their runes, we learned that Mira and Trissa had discussed which runes worked or didn't work on the Isles, and it says, quote, so far the only consensus is that certain materials can carry magic beyond the continent and others can't. So, if this is true, then this aligns with your thoughts, Addison, about the runes and the materials and them seemingly being most impactful.
Oh, man, it feels so good to be right about something, especially related to ruins. Wow. I feel great. Actually, I don't. I feel devastated because Andarna's still gone, but I'll take the small victory.
Oh, So now knowing how valuable Palladium is as a resource, I wonder if any of these runes used that material. We know that alloy daggers, which are made using Palladium, are imbued to store power, which could be used at a later time. Also, whatever they used in ward stones, obviously ward stones were imbued and hold power for a very long period of time. So I'm kind of like, someone should have tested that material off the continent as well, if they didn't already do that. I also really love seeing a little more from Quinn, who helps Violet with runes after stating it's hard to take advice from someone who's been doing them for so long they come a second nature. To be honest, most of what we've seen from Quinn is basically just her being Imogen's best friend. And we also know that she astral projects, but outside of that, we don't really know much about Quinn at all. And speaking of Quinn's signet, is her astral projection signet similar enough to Kaori's projection signet to count as a balance? Should either Kaori or Quinn turn venin? I don't think there is necessarily enough evidence regarding Kaori to think he's venin, but then again, he is very interested in learning about the Empyrean and the dragons, which you can logically argue is his job. However, if there's an alternative reason, it would be super useful to the venin to have someone specifically working on getting them dragon-related information. So,
How dare you?
I'm just saying.
I know. I don't think so, though.
As Quinn starts helping Violet, we learn that she's struggling even more now with runes because Terrence is too strong to break pliable threads from. And then Quinn responds, sounds right. It's not like Melgren is running around tempering runes with Coda's power. And that threw me for a loop a little bit again, because I was like, what is that supposed to mean? What else would Melgren use to temper runes? I mean, I would assume that this is something he does do sometimes as the commanding general of Navarre's army, unless this is a hint that Melgren is venin. Most of the time when I say this stuff, I am mostly kidding. But the more we read and learn that there's multiple traitors in leadership and that everything we know is a lie, basically, it starts seeming like less ridiculous when I say it. So
you do start to feel a little crazy, right? You really feel like you can't trust your own intuition. You can't trust your instincts. So it's fair.
We can't even trust what the characters conclude about anything because everything that they've been told is a lie too. So like they say things definitively, but then I feel like we're set up to be like, well, that was a lie. So what they concluded was wrong and therefore it's not true. It's actually this reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Or in Violet's case, she's just not making any conclusions at all. She's just waiting for it to be revealed to her. So you can't fucking trust Violet to figure anything out for you. To answer your question, I really took this as Quinn drawing a parallel between Terran and Coda's power, as they would both be extremely difficult to manipulate, and it doesn't seem like Melgren has mastered runes using Coda's power. And if anything, I want to say I think runes were outright outlawed after the rebellion because they're embedded in Tyrrish culture. So I don't think Melgren can do runes. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them, the upper leadership, can.
Oh, okay, duh. I forgot that they wouldn't be studying them.
Yeah,
because everybody just started.
Yeah.
Duh. Okay, yeah. Everybody just started working on runes recently. So I pulled a Riddick and giggled a little bit when Quinn suggests Violet needs to get rough when she breaks the edges, pull hard when tying the knots, referring to Terran's power. But naturally, Riddick wasn't going to let that slide either. And after Violet replies, harder, rougher, I can do that, Riddick says, I'm sure you can, considering who you're sleeping with.
That is literally the perfect setup for that's what she said joke. Oh my God.
Yes.
As soon as I read that, I was like, Riddick ain't gonna let that slide. Absolutely not. It's too good. Too easy.
Yep. Also, just before this, Violet remembers marked ones have been studying for years. By the time they reach the quadrant, they already know the patterns. They just need the magic. I am adding this as yet another thing that makes Tyrandor so powerful. Runes and the Tyrrish knots were a huge part of Tyrrish culture before they were banned by Navarre. And we know that if a person gets skilled enough with runes, they can basically compete with its signet power, which is the reason flyers are taught runes as part of their schooling. With Quinn's help, Violet finally manages to craft a passable unlocking rune by Triss's standards. Violet goes straight from one class to another, this time for instruction with Felix, who also gives her some tough love when he says, you may have lost your little Irid, but you still have Tear. I do think Felix has a point. He is right that just because the wards are up, it doesn't mean they are safe from the venin for long. I find it kind of ominous when he says, all it takes is another Jack Barlow, and they won't just be approaching Drathis while venin at our front door. Is this meant to foreshadow another Rider betrayal? We know that there's traitors in leadership, and we've seen riders turn right in front of everyone, like that one cadet during signet sparring class. I'm kind of feeling ready to pretty much just expect riders to turn at this point.
Oh, absolutely. And I wouldn't put it past the venin to try again. Remember, if either of the wards go down again, they cannot refire them. Not even because of the Irids, but because there are only 2 adult black dragons, Coda and Tarn, and they've both each now fired a ward stone. Tarn mentions that 2 new black dragons have hatched, but it will be years before they're actually big enough. And even once they go through all the dreamless sleep, it still takes them a while to have the ability to breathe fire. And so this is the last shot for the wards. If they go down, they're fucked.
So Felix is lecturing Violet because A, it never occurred to her that the venom were tracking her and would have showed up had she returned to the post as ordered. And B, her squad also endangered everyone by following after her rather than leaving her to make her, quote, mistakes. This really adds to this conversation about riders being weapons. When it comes to real war and strategy, they are just pawns for use, and the number one goal for them is to carry out the mission or goal successfully. If everyone is changing orders or strategies based on feelings for one another, then strategy is kind of pointless and leaves everybody vulnerable. I don't like that at all. I love that the squad watches out for each other, but I can also see how that can quickly become problematic if everyone is altering strategy to help a fellow rider out, or, going outside of specific protocol or leaving formation or whatever it is. So I think the biggest blow, though, was when Felix states, between you taking unnecessary risks and Ryerson leaving his post for you, we would have lost had the Irid not fired the ward stone. And this is basically exactly what Llewellyn was alluding to in the last set of chapters. The temple incident was literally exhibit A of how dangerous it can be that Xaden is so deeply connected to Violet.
Yep, we talked about this a lot in the beginning of the book. Violet is in such a weird position because power-wise and importance-wise, she basically outranks everyone. But at the end of the day, she's still just a second year who still has a lot to learn.
Her chat with Felix ends after she reports that she'd managed to split a bolt into 2 branches and not into a cloud from the sky. And I was like, from the sky. Is this alluding to Violet possibly gathering some power from a different source without realizing it? Another several days pass in a similar pattern of class and training, and Violet has a conversation with Brennan while he heals her. They check in about the state of things in Erasia, and notably Violet asks if Brennan thinks their squad would still return to the Skyeth if Tari does not confirm a continued alliance with Tyrandor. Violet, of course, secretly hopes that they'll stay in Erasia because she mostly loves that Xaden seems more like himself in the last few days. He's still ice in moments, but he also carries an air of peace and purpose, and for the first time, she doesn't just dream about their future here.
That was a really nice thought for about 2.5 pages. And then that hope was quickly extinguished. Nope.
They are interrupted then by an argument unfolding between Xaden and Bodhi. The argument revolves around Bodhi wanting to drop out of Biscaya so that he can help Erasia at the outposts, and I would like to point out that Bodhi says, or patrolling Dreyfus, which we know is about to fall. It's also clear that Bodhi has no interest in ruling, stating, you are the Duke, I am the rider, and that's how it was always meant to be until our parents got themselves executed. I will stand by your side and be your right fucking hand for the rest of our lives, but if you want a member of our family to hold that seat, you'd better hold your own shit together. And he walks out of the room without another word. And I was like, ooh.
Yikes.
It becomes clear that the reason Xaden seems to be peaceful in Erasia is because he's actually been slowly putting together a plan to ensure Erasia will be okay by training Bodhi to take over should anything happen to him. Not good. Bad omen.
Do not like it. It also seems like Bodhi is extremely against the idea of taking over as Duke of Tyrandor, which, if something happens to Xaden, really makes me wonder how that would play out. Because it sort of seems like Bodhi might refuse. I mean, when push comes to shove, would he really? I don't think so, but I don't think it would be a smooth transition despite what Xaden thinks.
After Bodhi leaves, Brennan gives Xaden some stuff to sign, but he does ask, I'd love to know why the King of Deverelli referred to my sister as your consort in this last offer. I was like, what's that all about? We know Xaden referred to Violet as his consort in Deverelli, but I do wonder, has Xaden taken some steps to legally name Violet as his consort?
I really just thought it was a funny reference to that joke from their time in Deverelli, and just a way for Brennan to be like, consort, how dare you, that's my sister.
I also found it notable that Xaden ignores Violet's question about preparing for her own demise and mentions two notable things. First, he says, Melgren warns me not to fly into battle or we'll lose, just a few days late without warning. But I was like, was it late though? If there's something that's going to happen in Drathis, as I've been speculating, is there something else coming that we don't know about yet?
Possibly, but it seems like it was in reference to the most recent attack on Eurasia. If that's true, it also means that Melgren can't see how Irids will impact the outcome of a battle because he didn't see that the wardstone would be fired and that they would win the battle. So I thought that was interesting.
Second, he mentions that the High Priestess of Dune's temple has written to say that Dune holds you and Rhiannon in her regard and that she is in my debt and owes me whatever favor I see fit. Ooh, that is definitely important. Is Xaden gonna ask for some sort of blessing or some sort of favor from Dune? I don't know, but I think we need to remember this because I think it's definitely going to come back into play. Violet goes on to fill Xaden in on her day and then asks again if he's preparing for his own demise. Xaden ensures her he's not embracing the fall. If that's what you're thinking, I won't give up a single day I have with you, not without a fight, which sounds wonderful. And it almost got me until the very last line of this chapter says, his smile instantly becomes a core memory. And I was like, a memory? Excuse me? Why would you need to memorize his smile unless something bad is going to happen to Xaden?
You know something bad's going to happen to him. I'm just demoralized now. You know what, though? I'm going to choose not to focus on that. And instead, I'm going to focus on when he said, I have something else in mind. And he looks at the throne. I'm just going to hold on to that.
It was his distraction, though, from the fact that something bad's going to happen. So that now concludes the assembly meeting. And now we just have our favorite moments to share.
My first favorite moment is when Taryn says, its wings were broke off of my leg. I will live. It does not. I'm like, oh my God, Taryn. You just always got to throw in his accomplishments, you know?
I also had a funny one from the dragons, and it's when Taryn says it's been ages since I've honored the color of my scale in such a manner. And then Endorna says, you blended it with the night. Hardly an accomplishment.
This is probably my most favorite moment from this whole set of chapters. I love when Rhiannon says, what was that all about? We could have caught them. And Violet says, that was Theophanie. And Rhi goes, and like throws up her hands like, okay. I just love that. She's a queen of the gods, perhaps, like Amari. That was for you. I did that for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
My next one that I liked, and this is sad in the scene, but it was touching as far as individual words go. And it was when Violet tells Endorna, I love you and I want you to feel complete. I want you happy and safe and thriving. I want you to live, even if it's not with me.
No, that was horrible the first time I had to hear it. And the second time and the third, I don't need to hear it again. Okay. Mine is also equally somber. I liked when Violet said, Taryn, he exists, therefore I must, because we are bound, never alone, always connected. Taryn, I know.
Taryn. My last one is, of course, the joke in Rune's class when Violet says, harder, rougher. I can do that. I nod, and then Riddick responds, I'm sure you can, considering who you're sleeping with.
My last favorite is when Xaden says, I have something else in mind. And he glances at the throne. And I was like, yeah, baby, my house, my chair, my woman.
All right, guys. So that now concludes our episode. It was a very long episode. So hopefully all this content will sustain you for a whole week. Like the venin with their little alloy conduits, okay?
We're the alloy that fuels your week. Oh man, guys, it's really late. We're getting kind of delulu over here. Oh my God.
So thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Booked Fantasy podcast. As always, we are so glad you found us. So please leave us reviews, subscribe to the podcast, and follow us on Instagram or YouTube to keep up with us on a daily basis. That's all we've got for you guys today.
So stay violent.
And we'll catch you all next week. Bye.
Bye. And stay tuned for some bloopers. I scroll the Fourth Wing the Fourth Wing subreddit. I took Violet to Umbriel where she only oh my gosh.
Wait, you're on mute.
Damn it. Okay, sorry. I thought I heard my kids at the door, and so I was like, mute. Like, mommy's busy.
The portrait was dropped in the fire, or the portrait in the night.
Were you thinking about saying steed?
Yes, I was.
I can see it in your eyes, the flicker of panic where you're like, in the stead. Oh man. Oh my god. Okay. Also, instead of Melgren, I wrote Melgreen. And I don't know why, but that's really funny. Melgreen. And that's funny to me.